people know.
Before we get straight into the podcast, I just want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors, Declan Kirby GAA Star. Declan Kirby GAA Star Championship Journey. It's a series of GAA team children's books written by primary school teacher and GAA coach Michael Egan. You can check it out in the link in the description down below, of course, as well. Follow the trials and tribulations of Declan Kirby and his team at Smithgreen Gaelic Football Club, recently formed a promising GAA team. The book is now available in Easons and all good bookshops, so check it out in the description down below, and let's get straight into it. Welcome back to GAA Fan TV. My name is Aaron. I'm delighted to be joined here today by Matthew Hurley from the GAA Statsman Podcast. We're going to be reviewing the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship in greater detail. We're going to be grading every county from A to F based on their performance in the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship and the National League this year. Now, the grades will be based on what each county was looking to achieve at the start of the year. Obviously, for example, if some counties get an F and some counties get an A, it doesn't necessarily mean the county that gets an A is better than the county that gets an F. But obviously, it is based on what they were looking to achieve at the start of the year. I suppose, first of all, I just want to give a huge thank you to everyone who subscribed to the channel recently. We just hit 2,000 subscribers. So massive thanks to anyone who has been watching the podcast and watching the channel. It was 4 years ago tomorrow actually that I set up the channel. I only made a couple of videos actually for the first couple of years, really up until 2020. So a big thanks to anyone who has subscribed or watched the videos this year, because this year has definitely been the year the channel has definitely kicked on a bit more. I suppose, Matthew, first of all, how's life with yourself?
Yeah, grand, Darren. I suppose GAA season's over now. It's a bit upsetting that way, but I suppose it's brilliant for you. 10-year anniversary today of that winning point by Stephen Cluxton, an unbelievable achievement. But yeah, as I said, GAA season's over. We have to concentrate on the soccer now, but the club championship's underway, so that's probably the main thing. And hopefully we'll get to go to a few games in the future. I hope I get to go to a few games in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, the semi-finals or the finals of the Cork Club Championship. So we've that to look forward at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are doing this live, so make sure to get your comments in the comments down below, and we'll certainly read out a few comments along the way. I suppose we'll start off with the Leinster counties, and as I said before, we'll be going through every county in Ireland, obviously barring Kilkenny because they don't have a football team, and obviously London and New York didn't compete in inter-county GAA this year. We'll start with Leinster. We'll go in alphabetical order. I suppose Carlow. I mean, like, I suppose for them, like in some ways, like obviously they, got trashed by Waterford, or they did trash Waterford, I should say, in the National League. They beat Wexford as well. They got themselves into a National League playoff, trying to get into Division 3. Like, what were your thoughts on Carlow, and what grade would you give them?
It was a decent season for Carlow. They've developed well enough under Niall Carew, though. Like, Turlock O'Brien, losing him was always going to be a challenge for Carlow, but overall, I'd probably give them a C, in line with expectations. They weren't expected to do much now in the Leinster Championship, but the fact they beat Wexford and Waterford so convincingly, like, that was a brilliant achievement to do that. But disappointing to lose to Louth and lose out on automatic promotion. But I suppose Louth are a decent side, developing well under Mickey Hart. So I suppose for Carlow, like, they're a small county, kind of overachieving, but for this season alone, I'd say in line with expectations, a C for me.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that as well. Like, obviously they were comfortably beaten by Longford, which I'd say was a disappointment for them. But like what you said, like, they have kind of moved away from, I suppose, that sort of defensive system they would have had under Turlock O'Brien and Stephen Poacher, who obviously would have been there as well. And obviously he's well known as being a predominantly defensive coach. So they have kind of moved away from that. And Dara Foley, John Murphy, Paul Broderick as well. Like, I suppose Division 4 will be tough next year. Like, you're going to have Cavan and Tipperary coming down. I think Wexford and Sligo are going to probably kick on a little bit next year as well. So, but look, listen, they're a team that does have a lot of experience. And I mean, you wouldn't rule out a push for promotion in 2022. It is a long way away, of course, but you wouldn't rule it out.
Absolutely, you wouldn't rule it out whatsoever, considering, I suppose, Cavan are probably a step above everyone else in Division 4, but you look at Tipperary, they're losing a lot of players. A lot of their players are getting old now. The likes of Conor Sweetie, for example, is nearing 30. Michael Quinlivan's nearing 30. So I suppose Tip might not have the same age as they used to. And as for Wexford, Carlow beat them this year, so they know how to beat this Wexford side. And you look at the other, Sligo, the young players there, I suppose they won a minor championship, but it takes a while for them players to bid in. So yeah, promotion's absolutely realistic game for Carlow. I suppose Cavan would be the only really hard one there, but the rest, it's a realistic game to definitely get promotion by beating those counties.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a comment coming in there from Oren O'Neill who says, I would say Tyrone or an A, and definitely we'll get onto Tyrone later on in the podcast, but I don't think there can be much denying Tyrone being an A at this point. I suppose next up in terms of the alphabetical order would actually be Dublin. So like Dublin is I don't know, like for most people, I suppose they would give them an F, given the fact that, you know, they were 6 in a row champions. They were beaten in a semi-final. They were quite poor. I don't know, like I'm torn between a D and an F, and I don't really necessarily agree with the E grade. I think a fail is a fail at the end of the day, but it's a tough one, like, because like they still won a Leinster championship, and I still think it could have been worse. So like F is the lowest grade. Like if they got beaten by Meath, you would have said an F. They get beat by Mayo, it's still an F. Like it's a tricky one. What have you gone for?
Yeah, it's a very tight one. I personally have given Dublin an F. I just think like Leinster was a bit too easy. I think it's Meath and Kildare. It takes a while for them players to beat it. Them young, talented, brilliant players. So I suppose like that was what they were. The aim for Dublin really was to win the All Ireland, and considering they lost to Mayo, and not only they lost to Mayo, the way they lost to Mayo in the second half, where they completely lost their heads, they underperformed in that second half when they were well clear at half time. I think it was a disappointing end for Dublin, but you have to, I suppose F is probably, it's probably a bit harsh in many ways, because considering they lost Cluxton at the start of the year, and I've even said this plenty of times on podcasts, etc., Cluxton was a huge loss to that Dublin team. And even the last few minutes when Dublin were playing around at the back, I think that wouldn't have happened if Cluxton was there. I think he would have calmed down that Dublin defence and put it safely into midfield or safely to touch, rather than the ball going out for 45, and obviously Robbie Henley kicking that point. But Cluxton, as I said, absolutely colossal loss for Dublin, and it's a question whether he'll come back. No, I think he has to come back to that Dublin team. No matter how talented players Dublin have, they need leaders, and Cluxton was certainly a leader in that team. He was certainly a player that would calm down the defence. But overall, I'd probably give him an F, considering Leinster was probably easy, and the way they lost to Mayo, in my opinion, deserves an F.
Yeah, I suppose like if you were to look at, I suppose at the start of the season and you were to judge Dublin, like most people had Dublin as heavy favourites. Like a lot of people were looking at Dublin as the side that were going to win 7 in a row. And I suppose Kerry were the team that most people thought, you know, would be the second biggest challengers. And I think like when you look at the overall, like if you were to do a power rankings, you probably have Tyrone and Kerry and probably Mayo ahead of Dublin. So I think Dublin have probably regressed quite a bit this year. And given the fact that the options that they had from the bench probably weren't good enough. And I suppose an F probably, if you were to base it on this year, I suppose you probably would have to give them an F. But I suppose at the same time, like there's that part of me in me that kind of looks at it and thinks we won 6 in a row. Like you can't really ask for much more from this Dublin side. But I do think if you were to ask the Dublin team, you know, if you were to ask each Dublin player individually, they would look at this season as a failure, because, you know, with the talent and players that they have, and Brian Fenton, Con O'Callaghan, Noel Scully, Dean Rock, like they really should have been doing a lot better. And fair enough, you can lose All Irelands. Like you're not going to win an All Ireland every year. Like that's unrealistic. But the way they got beat, like what you said against Mayo, was obviously very disappointing, considering they had a 6-point lead at half time. Mayo really didn't get going for about 60 minutes. So like Mayo were there for the taking, and Dublin just didn't capitalise on it.
Absolutely, Aaron. Yeah, it's fact really. Like I suppose you even look at them senior players as well. Like I was talking to a person that actually watched Rahidi last week. I think Brian Howard and Brian Fenton were playing, and they didn't seem to be that good. In all honesty, they were struggling through the game, and that was a club championship game. So I suppose there's a question now: is this the end of this great Dublin side? I don't know. Like you look at the youngsters coming through: Kieran Archer, Lee Gannon, Pador Coffey-Byrne. Like you have to question whether Desi Farrell should have played them this year, considering them older players are now regressing quite a bit. And you look at the bench, as you rightly said, there isn't much talent coming off. And I just wonder if the likes of Gannon, the likes of Archer, and the likes of O'Coffey-Byrne, or even a few players like Ross McGarry coming on, would they frighten defences more than, let's just say, a few of them Dublin players like Tom Lahiff, or I suppose the Baskels were probably the only Dublin players that would strike fear into the opposition, but the rest of the bench was pretty ordinary indeed compared to the Mayo players that faced the likes of James Carr and Darren Cohen coming on. you'd never see that, a Mayo bench being much better than the Dublin bench. So I suppose it's going to be hard for Dublin to improve that next year. And I think it has to start with the young players. You have to bring in the likes of Kieran Archer and Lee Gannon, who I think are exceptional young players. And I suppose Jack McCaffrey, whether he'll come back, I don't know, will he come back at all? Like, considering what Dublin, like I read an article recently, considering what Dublin did at the start of the year to, train during COVID times, what would Jack McCaffrey think of coming back into that environment? I suppose, I don't know what you think about that, Aaron. It's a very interesting aspect there. But do you think Jack McCaffrey will come back into the team? But or after that, do you think he'll just call it quits completely?
I'd be surprised to see Jack McCaffrey come back, in all honesty, because I've seen an interview he done on Off the Ball, and he said, if you see me training with Dublin again, you have permission to shoot me. So I think to come out with a statement like that, I think tells you that I don't think he really, his heart's really in it. And that is the weird question with Dublin. Like, you do have a lot of players that have been opting out, that have been leaving. Paul Mannion's obviously left. Stephen Cluxton, like we said, has left. A lot of players, early retirement and whatnot, backroom management team leave. And obviously a lot of rumours about Dessie Farrell and his training methods and this and that. Like, I don't always agree with all those rumours. Like, you see those rumours come out about every county really every year. You've seen, obviously, with Kerry last year, all the rumours that came out there as well. So, but like, you would have to say at the same time, like, there is a lot of question marks under Dessie, like, because, like, would that have happened under Jim Gavin? Probably not. In all honesty, I don't think Dublin would have had as many players opting out under Jim Gavin. So there is a lot of pressure going into Dessie. Like, I think he's earned the right, to stay at Dublin next year. And look, listen, we might not win the All-Ireland next year. Like, it's obviously not a given, but I do think there needs to be a significant improvement in Dublin's performances. Like, they need to play a lot better than what they did this year, because like what you said before, you're not going to win every All-Ireland, but like, for a county like Dublin, considering how good their players are, and considering this is a golden era, like, this won't last forever, I do think Dublin need to capitalise on it, because I think if they were to not win the All-Ireland next year, I think all of a sudden that's 2 years. And you see with Kerry and you see with some other counties, as soon as those years start stacking up, it becomes a lot harder to bridge that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And great examples would be in the hurling game. Like, Cork in 05 were very competitive in many years, and then they didn't win it in 06. They lost to Kilkenny in the final. Then 07, 08, they weren't competitive at all. Another great example was the Kilkenny team around 2015. They lost an All-Ireland next year to Tipperary. Then they go out in the qualifiers to Waterford, and then it's hard to win an All-Ireland. Like, 7 years is considered a famine in Kilkenny. I think it would be considered a famine in Dublin if they didn't win an All-Ireland for the next 5 years. But you'll be hearing these rumours outside about the camp not being happy with Dessie Farrell and all that. I don't know, is it believable? You hear, like, every year, as you said, with Kerry. I suppose there is still friction in Kerry. Well, we'll get on to Kerry later on, but yeah, it's a very tough one to judge. But I suppose you're right in saying if they do not win an All-Ireland next year, or the year after, will be an absolute disaster for Dublin. But you have to question, like, Tyrone don't necessarily do All-Irelands back-to-back. So and Mayo are Mayo, in all honesty. I don't know, will they win All-Ireland next year? And Kerry's defence is always fragile. So you'd have to question, if Dublin aren't going to win the All-Ireland, or Tyrone aren't going to win the All-Ireland, who's going to win it next year? Because I don't think the chasing pack are that great at the moment. They aren't capitalising on this opportunity. So it's hard to see how Dublin go without All-Ireland in the next 3-4 years, in all honesty. It'd be really unheard of, in all honesty.
Yeah, I do think we'll be thereabouts anyways, and I do think there are a lot of very good club players, and I think there'll be a lot of attention put on the club championship, and I've been keeping a close eye on the club championship as well. And normally with a lot of Dublin players, you'd see them resting, during this time of the year for the early rounds of the club championship. I'm not seeing too much of that. Fair enough, Dean Rock didn't play for Ballymun the other week, but generally a lot of them have been playing. I suppose we'll move on to Kildare, and I suppose for Kildare, like, an interesting season, and we'll certainly speak about Jack O'Connor and his comments in a moment. But promoted to Division 1, they had big wins over Meath, big wins over Cork as well. They got past Westmeath just about. Westmeath probably on another day could have won that game. And then against Dublin, like, very disappointing in all honesty, given the fact that Dublin probably weren't at their best either that day. So what have you gone for with Kildare? I've gone with a C.
I think I've, overstepped the mark a bit with Kildare here in my notes. I'd probably give them a B. Considering they went up to Division 1 and considering they weren't favourites at the start of the year, it would have been probably Mayo, Meath, considering the amount of youngsters coming through in Cork, they probably would have been fancied to beat Kildare, especially in the first game. So, yeah, I'd give Kildare a B. Maybe a C is probably a fair result, considering the way they capitulated against Clare in the league. That was a bit disappointing. But I suppose they finished top of their group. They beat Meath. They got to a Leinster final. Yeah, I suppose it's all you can ask for, really, about this Kildare team, looking at it from the outside. But considering you look at them in the Leinster final, as you rightly said, they were very disappointing. Other than the likes of Daniel Flynn, Jimmy Hyland in the first half, who were challenging Dublin a small bit, but the rest of the team didn't seem to be really up there. I suppose with Kildare, I think you need all the players fully fit, all the main players, the likes of Daniel Flynn, the likes of Kevin Feedy, who wasn't fully fit for the whole year, the likes of Jimmy Hyland, Dereck Kirwan has to be on form in every game. And I suppose there's good youngsters coming through in Kildare, so there's reason to be optimistic. And I suppose Jack O'Connor left, but I suppose Davy Burke left his job in Wicklow, so you have to imagine he'd go to Kildare. So that's a really good coup, considering he's part of a winning mentality in Kildare after winning the Under-20 Championship in 2018. So I think the sky's the limit, really, for Kildare. Could they win Leinster next year, though? I still think it's a bit soon. Could they stay up in Division 1? I think it's not that Kildare are bad or anything, but the amount of good teams in Division 1, all the other 7 sides are just a step above Kildare at this moment in time. The likes of Armagh, Monaghan, Donegal, who would be close to Kildare, are just that step above. So it'll be a real success if they stayed up in Division 1 next year and got to a Leinster final. But to be honest, I don't see it happening. But for this season, I'd probably give them a B, because they went up to Division 1 and got to a Leinster final, and that was their aim this year.
Yeah, I suppose it is a fair point. And like you said, with Jack O'Connor stepping down, like, certainly to come out with those comments about, the Kerry job and all the rest, like a little bit disrespectful to Kildare, and you can understand why a lot of Kildare fans were very frustrated by that, because Jack O'Connor had said a couple of weeks previous that he was in this for the long haul. And like what you said there, I think surely it has to be Davy Burke. Like, you're looking at that Under-20 All-Ireland winning side in 2018. Like, there hasn't been too many players that have made the step up to senior level. And, it's not often you go and win an Under-20 All-Ireland. And I think for Davy Burke, he'd know a lot of those Kildare lads. Like, he'd know those players. He'd be able to, make the step up for a lot of those players. So I think, like, surely they have to go with Davy Burke. To be honest, I'm surprised they haven't announced it yet. I don't know what the hold-up is, or what's going on there behind the scenes, but you'd surely have to feel he'd be the man to take charge of Kildare's senior football management position next year.
You'd have to feel that way, yeah. And he's a very promising manager. I'm not sure why he left Wicklow, and honestly, maybe it's because he envisaged Jack O'Connor leaving Kildare. We'll never know, but I suppose he actually did a good job at Wicklow. He got them up from Division 4, and with that group of players, and to beat Cavan as well, that was a very good achievement. So you'd have to imagine he'd take the Kildare job, and as I said previously, he's part of a winning mentality in Kildare down through the years, and it would make sense to appoint him as manager. But I suppose there's the question, can he win a Leinster title with this Kildare side? I suppose they haven't won a Leinster title since 2000. Like, that's a long time for Kildare. Like, I had Johnny Doyle on the podcast previously, and that was one of his first years playing for Kildare. It tells you how long ago that was. So, yeah, it's a very tricky assignment to win a Leinster title with Kildare, but I suppose they have to win it sooner rather than later. And considering the rumours coming out of the camp in Dublin, I suppose it's kind of a realistic game, maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, but not next year, I don't think. I think them young players need to develop a bit more and gain a bit of experience before winning a Leinster title. But I think Davy Burke is the man that can steady the ship for that Kildare team. But whether he can stay up in Division 1, which will probably be a main aim for Kildare next year, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, it'll be very tough for them in Division 1. Like, you're looking at all the counties there, like, and it will be very, very tough for them, no doubt about it. I suppose Laois, we won't spend too much time on them. I mean, lost every game, and unfortunately in 2021, I suppose you can't really look past an F for Laois, in my opinion. Like, fair enough, they've obviously had a lot of older players, kind of, the Kingstons and whatnot. A lot of players are aging. You've got a young player in Evan O'Carroll coming through, but to get beaten by Westmeath by a scoreline of 320 to 110, I mean, that is quite extraordinary. Like, a 16-point loss against a team that a lot of people, Laois and Westmeath, were fairly even there for a number of years, like both getting promoted at the same time, both neck and neck through the years. So the fact that Westmeath went and beat them as comfortably as they did, like, I think, I suppose, worrying times for Laois, especially with Mike Quirk stepping down as well.
Hugely worrying times for Laois. I'd give them a myth as well. Like in Division 2, I thought they were very, very disappointing. In the Clare game, not really that great. Cork, I suppose they faded out a small bit, but we've seen Cork this year, they're not that great either. So I suppose it's not a great achievement there. Kildare, they got absolutely slaughtered. And Westmeath the same as well. And Down, they got relegated to Division 3. And even in Division 3, I don't think they'll even go up, in all honesty, next year. Like, you look at the teams in Division 3, Limerick, Westmeath, Louth, I think under Mickey Hart are probably a bit ahead of Laois at the moment. So, yeah, as you said, it's absolutely worrying time for Laois. I'd be worried if I was a Laois supporter. And considering the 2018 season, they actually challenged Dublin a small bit in the Leinster final. They challenged Monaghan. And they had good players coming through. Graham Brody being one of them, and he's disappeared from the panel. I don't know what's the story there. Well, Niall Corbett's a decent goalkeeper, so I suppose it isn't that bad. But I suppose you look at their main players, as I said, the Kingstons. Ross Munley's 38, 39 now, so he's not going to be around forever. So this is a huge turning point for Laois. Colin Begley, another one, I think 33, 34. So a lot of them players are aging. It's a worrying time for Laois. I'd be worried if I was a Laois supporter, and most definitely an F for the season in 2021.
Yeah, and I suppose moving on to Longford, I suppose, like, obviously they beat Tip on the final day of Division 3 to stay in the division, which was definitely a huge achievement for a county like Longford, given the fact that Tipperary were the Munster champions the year previous. And it is kind of interesting with Longford. Like, they do have some talented footballers there, and the likes of Darren Gallagher and Rian Brady. Mickey Quinn's obviously come back in, and you know, they got that win over Carlow, of course, as well in the Leinster Championship. And I remember me and you were previewing the All-Ireland Championship when we were discussing them against Meath and saying how, you know, Longford potentially could cause a bit of an upset. Now, in the end, Meath went and absolutely hammered Longford and beat them completely out of the gate, beat them quite comfortably. But, like, there is talent there in Longford. Like, I've given them a C, which might be a bit generous, because I think some people maybe would have felt that they, you know, let's not forget in 2020, they were actually very close to getting promotion. Like, they were only 1 or 2 wins away. So, like, what do you think? Is that a bit generous, or what have you gone for?
I've personally gone for D, but I can see why you give them a C. Like, the population in Longford, it's the second smallest county in Ireland. And when you consider that, I think they're punching above their weight a small bit. But considering what they've achieved over the last few seasons, I think the performance against Meath, particularly in the Leinster Championship, was very, very disappointing. I know Meath have developed a small bit, but you would have kind of expected Longford to put up more of a challenge than they did. So that was a disappointing aspect. But I think next year we'll see Longford back to their best, because the qualifier system does suit Longford, in all honesty, and it has suited them over the years. They've beaten the likes of Mayo, Monaghan down through the years. They challenged Cork. They've challenged Donegal. So they do have a reputation in the qualifiers. They're a very good side once the qualifier system's introduced. So I suppose that's where they'll pick up plaudits by getting through the qualifiers next year, and they need that. But for now, I'd probably give them a D, but I could see why you give them a C, because the population in Longford, they're punching above their weight a small bit, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I suppose another county that obviously doesn't have that much of a population is obviously Louth, and they were in Division 4 at the start of the year. They've obviously brought Mickey Hart in. Things weren't looking too good at the start. They lost to Antrim, but I suppose after that, they really have turned things around. Like, they won both their games against Sligo and Leitrim, and obviously got promoted as well. They beat Carlow in that Division 4 playoff. And as well against Offaly, like, Offaly getting a lot of plaudits, and we'll get onto them in a moment. Like, they nearly beat Offaly in that game. Like, it went to extra time. Offaly pulled away in extra time, ended up winning the game by 9 points. But I've gone for a B for Louth. I don't think, you know, there's much more they could do. You could arguably even give them an A, but I do think at the same time they did lose to Antrim in that game. It would have been interesting to see how they would have got on against Antrim actually in the Division 4 final. I think that would have probably decided whether they get an A or not. But what have you gone for?
I've gone for a B as well. Like, as you said, they're a small county, punching above their weight a small bit, but Mickey Hart has definitely turned things around in Louth, and it's kind of a Mick O'Dwyer effect that he had on Laois and Kildare, Wicklow down through the years. And I see Louth as a major threat next season. Like, Division 3, Cavan and Tip are now gone. I think it's a realistic aim for Louth to go up to Division 2 next season. Like, who is there? Fermanagh, Limerick, Westmeath. Like, I think it's a realistic game, really, for Louth to challenge for promotion. And look at the players they have. Sam Mulroy is a very good player. A few of their centre-backs, I don't know, what's his name, Dermot Campbell or someone from centre-back is a very good player. So, yeah, Louth seem a very good side, and Mickey Hart is developing them well. And considering they lost an extra time to a developing Offaly side under John Mahan, that's a very good season for Louth, and I'd probably give him a B as well. It would have been interesting to see how they've progressed through like the Taunton Cup. I think that probably should have gone ahead this year, considering, you know, the All-Ireland lasted 2 weeks into September. They could have easily done the Taunton Cup or qualifiers in the Sam Maguire this season, but that's a conversation for another day. But anyway, I'd probably give Louth a B, but it would have been interesting to see how they've progressed through the qualifiers this season.
Yeah, and I suppose Liam Horgan was saying there about Louth having the same population as Mayo, so maybe I was a little bit off there with my my population statistics. But speaking of Meath, or speaking of Louth's rivals, I suppose you've obviously got Meath in there, and I suppose Meath is an interesting one because, you know, up until the Dublin game, you really probably would have had them around the D, maybe a little bit lower, like didn't get promoted to Division 2 when a lot of people felt they would. You know, a narrow win over Westmeath didn't look particularly great that day. And obviously, before the Leinster Championship, really, there were a lot of question marks over Meath, but they went out, comfortably beat Longford, like completely wiped the floor of them, didn't give them a sniff whatsoever. Against the Dubs, like they had Dublin on the ropes, like it was 3 points going into extra time. And I really do feel like maybe if the referee made one or two decisions different in the first half, or maybe Meath played a little bit better, they could have beaten Dublin. Like, you know, Dublin were there for the taking that day. So I've gone and given them a C in the end. What have you gone for?
Gone for a C as well, but I was really tempted to give them a B. But considering the ladies footballers won and the minors won, things are really looking up for Meath, in all honesty. But I suppose the senior sides weren't that great this year, but that'll improve in time. You look at the young players, even in that Meath team, the senior team at the moment, the likes of Jordan Morris and all of them, Donald Keoghan's still there, Brian Menton's still there. They still have the experienced heads, and they still have some very good youngsters coming through. So times are very good for Meath. And as you said, the Dublin game, they could have beaten that Dublin team, but to get within 6 points of a Dublin team that was considered unbeatable before the year even started, what an achievement, considering what margin Meath lost to last year. I think it was something well over 15 points. I think it was 22 points in the end. But geez, it was a very good season for Meath, considering their minor success, and that will be through the senior team in the next few years, I'm sure. So, yeah, C is a fair result for Meath, and yeah, I think a Leinster title is realistic in the next few years. Maybe not next year, considering it's a bit soon for them, but consider the next 2 or 3 years, I think it's a realistic game for Meath, and I think they could actually top Division 2 next year. It's a bold claim, but I think they're much better than most of the teams in Division 1 next season. So, yeah, times look on the up for Meath, and I give them a C as well.
Yeah, I think that definitely is a real chance. I mean, it would be interesting to see what way the structure is for Division 2 next year, or all 4 divisions, whether they do it in group stages again, or whether they go back to a team of, or a group of, or one big league table of 8. I'd kind of agree with you. I still think Galway would have more than Meath, in my opinion, but I think Meath would definitely have a huge possibility, like to be up there, like considering Roscommon are probably going to be in a little bit of transition. But like what you said, I think, you know, they've a lot of very good, talented young lads coming through. Joey Wallace, Ronan Jones, Cathal Hickey looked very good this year and was probably an outside shout for Young Footballer of the Year, had Meath maybe progressed a little bit further on in the championship. So, you know, but I suppose at the same time, like Andy McEntee's been there a while, and you would feel like it's kind of now or never really for Andy McEntee. Like he kind of there needs to be something more for Meath next year in terms of maybe not winning a Leinster title, but, you know, promotion to Division 1, I think, will be a huge step forward, but maybe just being more competitive with the Dubs, like maybe 1 or 2 points or something like that. Because, I mean, I don't know, like it'd be interesting to see what happens next year.
It would be very interesting to see what happens, but I suppose we won't see the Meath development line improve as much until the next few years, because don't forget the minor success was only this year. So that'll take about 3 or 4 years to develop. But having said that, even the signs are very good for me to at least win a Leinster title next season. And I suppose they want to win a Leinster title sooner rather than later, to kind of forget 2010. I suppose it was a tainted Leinster title in many ways. So they'd want to win it properly at least. But yeah, the signs look very good for Meath, and considering they got close to Dublin this season, signs look very good. And it's a tough question. Who would you rather be at the moment, Kildare or Meath? Oh, it's a very tough one, but I'd slightly go for Meath, considering Kildare might get a few trimmings in Division 1. Meath have time to develop in Division 2 next season. So I'd rather be a Meath fan at the moment. I suppose Kildare fans might argue against that, but yeah, it should be very interesting to see how Meath develop. Getting to Division 1 is a main aim for Meath, and to develop since then. And I think if they get up to Division 1, there's a realistic aim they could stay in Division 1, consolidate that place, and, consolidate that place for the next few years. You see what Monaghan did. They weren't expected to stay up the first year, and they're in a very long time in Division 1, considering what size they have in population. So it's definitely an attainable objective for Meath, and best of luck to them. I think the production line looks very good in Meath, and the Meath fans will be getting excited, no doubt.
Absolutely, and Oran O'Neill says there the number 10 for the Meath Miners is unreal, and I think he's referring to Sean Emanuel, who definitely had a top class season for Meath, no doubt about it. I remember watching him against the Dubs, and he tore them apart, like, no doubt about it. Obviously, it'd be a while before we see him up at the seniors, but definitely a lot of exciting times for Meath with the Miners as well, no doubt about it. I suppose another county that definitely a lot of exciting times there is obviously Offaly. What a season for them, getting promoted to Division 2, a huge achievement for them, like won all 3 of their league games, then obviously won the playoff game as well. They were beaten quite comfortably by Derry and Croke Park, but obviously that was almost like a bonus game. It was the final, and it was a game that not many people expected to even go ahead. Obviously came through loud, and even against Kildare, like a 5-point defeat against Kildare, like they weren't a million miles away. So what have you gone for?
I might seem a bit generous to Offaly people here, but I give them an A. I think it's been an absolute superb season, and when you factor in they've got promoted to Division 2, that's a superb achievement. And they got close to Kildare. They could have beaten Kildare the other day, and considering the size they beat to get there, Limerick, Tipperary, Fermanagh, that's not easy whatsoever. And well done to Offaly for getting promoted and to getting through that fight with Louth in the Leinster Championship. And things are only going to improve next year. Tomas O'Shea's come in. That's a huge coup for Offaly. It's an unbelievable appointment. And considering that appointment, and considering the under-20 talent coming through, considering they already have John Mahon as manager and Cian Farrell, Cian Johnson, all them. Cian Johnson didn't play much this year, and look how much Offaly improved. So there is still more to come next year, and this might be a bold claim, but I think they'll stay up in Division 2 next year. I think the signs look very good for Offaly. They're a very good side to watch. It looks very good for Offaly, and considering Michael Duggan and Shane Lowry putting so much effort into this project they have with the faithful, the signs look very good, and I give them a deserved A this year. Well done to all involved with Offaly, and the signs look very, very good for the near future.
Yeah, I'd have to give them an A as well. Like, I mean, they won every game in the league. Obviously, like what I said, they got beaten by Derry, but, like in most other divisions, that game didn't even happen and came through loud. It was obviously a tough game for them. They came through that. They were obviously favourites going into that game. And then obviously against Kildare, very close as well. And like what you said, exciting times for Offaly. Like, obviously won the under-20 football championship this year as well, like for the first time in 20 odd years. So I suppose, like for Offaly in particular, for John Mon, like what do you think? Do you think like a lot of those under-20s should go straight up to the senior team, or do you think maybe they should be slowly sort of integrated into the team? Because there seems to be like two schools of thought. Like, some people are saying you can't rush those players, you can't throw them in at senior level too quickly, because I suppose, they might get drowned out in Division 2 and, they might take a step backwards. But what do you think?
It's interesting, all right? Like, I watched one of your videos on Limerick winning the All-Ireland. Like, Aaron Gillan was a star of the under-20 team in 2017. He moves into the senior team in 2018. That year they win the All-Ireland. But I suppose the other side of it, you look at Galway, they brought through Matthew Tierney. Well, he's done well this year, in fairness, Jack Lynn. But I suppose they need time to develop, and it showed this year. They got outplayed by Mayo in the second half, and maybe it will improve over the next few years, but I'd be for bringing through that development, especially Jack Bryan, that I think should be in that senior team next year. Cormac Egan, I don't know, I might be wrong on this, but I think he's around 17 or 18 still, so that's very young. I'd keep him in the under-20 team, in all honesty. I'd bring through the likes of Jack Bryan. I bring through Morgan Tynan and a few of those players. But the thing is, if you bring through these players, they're part of a winning mentality. And that's what you need in Offaly to get through tough games in the Leinster Championship. Like, if you have that winning mentality going through up to senior, you could beat anybody in Leinster. Well, disregarding Dublin, obviously, because they're Dublin, they're an unbelievable side. But they could easily beat Meath or Kildare if they just bring through these young players next season. And the signs look very good. And it is a tough one, I suppose. There's pros and cons to both sides of the argument, but I personally be for bring through young players straight away into the team because it brings a winning mentality and it could get you serious results in the future.
Yeah, like I don't think there's any shame on having Jack Bryant on the bench or even Cormac Egan or some of them lads, like just having them on the bench. Like you've seen a lot of counties have kind of done that in the past, like the Cork Hurlers and Limerick Hurlers have kind of done that. And I suppose for Offaly, like realistically in the championship, are they going to progress and go, get to an All-Ireland quarter final? I mean, they might do, you never know, you certainly wouldn't rule it out. But I mean, realistically speaking, they're probably not going to get as far. So it would leave, if the under-20 championship is, we'll see what dates that's scheduled for. But if that's kind of played later on in the year again, then you could have a case where, some of those players end up playing for the senior team and the under-20 team. And some players end up coming off the bench. A lot of, players could learn from each other as well. So definitely, it will definitely be interesting to see what John Mon and Offaly does. I suppose Westmeath, we'll discuss them. I mean, I'm going to be honest, like a tough one to grade as well, because a lot of very, very good performances this year, like very good against Cork. I remember in the first half or the first quarter, they were unbelievable. Ray Cannellan looked absolutely brilliant. Nearly beat Meath, nearly beat Mayo as well. But all in all, like they still lost all their league games. They still got relegated. They put out a brilliant performance against Laois. Probably should have beaten Kildare. So, like, it's a tough one with Westmeath. If you were to look at the results, you could probably go as far as an F. But if you were to look at their performances, you could go upwards towards, a B or a C. Like, very, very tough one to grade.
It's a very tough one to grade. It probably is reminiscent of the Irish soccer team at the moment. Like, they perform so well in games against the likes of Azerbaijan or Luxembourg, or especially against Portugal, and the results don't seem to be there. It's the same for Westmeath. Like, I even watched, as a Cork fan, obviously, I watched the Cork game, and Westmeath should have beat us. It's simple as that. They absolutely should have beat us. John Hazen was superb. I think Lorcan Dolan's another find this year. I think he's an unbelievable player. I've gone towards the performance end, in all honesty. I've given them a B. I think it's been a brilliant season for Westmeath. And let's not forget, it's part of a process. The players are going to develop in the near future. Like, they can't be relying on Kieran Martin and John Haslin forever, or even Joe Egan, another player who had an outstanding year. But they have to bid these young players like the likes of Lorcan Dolan and Luke Loughlin in the next few years. And they did that this year. And considering they got close to Mayo, to Meath, to Kildare, to Cork, brilliant season. And they hammered Laois as well. People seem to forget that. They hammered them by 16 points. And considering they were so close to Laois over the last few years, that was a superb achievement. And well done to Westmeath for that. I suppose the results, they will come. Just Westmeath fans have to be patient. Just trust in the process, and it will get you results in the next few years. I've personally gone for a B. Maybe I'm a bit too nice, Aaron, but I've gone towards the performance spectrum rather than the results.
Yeah, I've given them a C, so I suppose just a little bit below. Like, I think with Ronan O'Toole as well, who look very impressive. Not the finished article yet, but looks like a very tricky, skillful player. Like, there are positives for Westmeath, and I think they'll be heavy favourites in Division 3, in my opinion, to come straight back up. I'd have them as the favourites at this moment in time anyway, to be Division 3 champions. We'll obviously see what happens between now and then. And yeah, like you seen what happened was, they were playing very defensive early on in the year against Cork. They decided to play on the front foot. Fair enough, they were a lot more leaky defensively, but you see there that there is a team there, and certainly going forward, like, they have a lot of talent and they have a lot of potential. And it does go to show sometimes when you kind of let the shackles off of a very defensive system, which, to be fair, was actually working to a certain degree and nearly got them wins over Meath and Mayo. But you see what happens when they actually play on the front foot against Laois as well, for example. In that second half, they were very impressive. Moving on to Wexford, I mean, interesting one with Wexford. At the start of the year, you definitely would have had them as a guaranteed F. I mean, they'd lost both of their league games against Waterford and Carlow. I think a lot of people would say like a county like Wexford should certainly be doing a lot better, and whether there's a lot of things going behind the scenes between the footballers and hurlers, you never quite know. They obviously beat Sligo in that Shield game. They then go and beat Wicklow in the Leinster Championship preliminary round, and then they against the Dubs like gave a very, very spirited performance. So I've gone with a C, which might be a little bit generous given the fact they lost both of their league games and were essentially probably one of the lowest ranked teams in division in the whole football pyramid if you were to judge it off the league. But I suppose in my opinion, like I think that performance against the Dubs will give them a lot of confidence. And I suppose the question is now really, is that going to be a once-off for Wexford, or can they actually build from this now? Can they actually now go and compete for Division 4? Because I do think they have the players to do so.
They absolutely have the players to do so, and Shea Roach knows Wexford's football inside and out, and it's very exciting times for Wexford considering their performance against Dublin. I've gone for a C as well. Like, as you rightly said at the start of the year, it was a guaranteed F. Like, I watched their 2 games against Waterford and Carlow, and I just didn't see a plan there at Wexford. I don't know, was that being particularly harsh, but like against Waterford, like they probably should have beaten them in all honesty. But Waterford just they beat him in the last minute. Well, I suppose like I know Carlow and Waterford, it was disappointed to lose to them, but both times they lost by a point, so it wasn't the end of the world in many ways. So they beat Sligo in the Shield game, as you said, and the win against Wicklow, I didn't see that coming whatsoever. I don't know, it was the fact that Wicklow beat Cavan in the league. That was a brilliant achievement for them, or maybe Wicklow just took their eye off the ball, but Wexford proved there was no fluke in that Dublin game. They were absolutely superb. They definitely made their county proud that day, and yeah, I hope times are returning for good times are returning for Wexford, because I can remember them in an All-Ireland semi-final facing Tyrone. Like, I could remember them challenging Dublin in the Leinster final in 2011. They probably should have beaten Dublin in all honesty, like with that goal earlier on, and then James McCarthy pulled Dublin out of jail. But yeah, it's a difficult one with Wexford over the last few years. Maybe the hurling's taken precedence. You see the controversy there between Paul Galvin and Davy Fitzgerald, but I suppose Davy's gone now. It's a less of a controversial figure in the hurling world in Wexford, so they should improve next year. And for this year, I think a C is a fair result. The league wasn't that great, but the championship was superb.
Yeah, and I suppose Liam Horgan's going with an F for Wexford, I suppose, which is probably a little harsh in some respects. But I suppose when you look at them maybe in the league, you could probably understand maybe why to a certain extent, and given what they've done in the past. And like what you said back in 2011, like I do remember being at that game as a Dublin fan and coming out of it and thinking, oh my goodness, like we've really got away with one there. Like I remember the likes of Brosnan and Wexford were playing really well. And let's not forget Matthew Ford wasn't available for that final as well. Like who could have known what could have happened if Wexford had to come through that game? Like it is kind of mad to look at the direction about Dublin and Wexford have taken since that 2011 final. I suppose Wicklow, I mean, they lost every league game up until Cavan, and that was a huge win, obviously, over Cavan, and Shawnee Furlong, who produced a top-class performance. And I suppose for a county like Wicklow to get up to Division 3, first of all, is a huge achievement. To be in, I suppose, such a, with such tough teams in there, like Cavan, who are Ulster champions, and they had to play Tipperary at one stage as well. So, like, for them to actually stay in Division 3, like, a huge achievement. But at the same time, like you were saying earlier, maybe why did Davy Burke step away? I do think that defeat to Wexford probably reminded maybe Davy Burke and Wicklow to a certain extent that it's so hard for counties like Wicklow, Leitrim, the smaller Longford, Louth to really get up beyond like Division 3 and push on. Like we'll speak about Clare in a moment. They're probably one of the only counties that have ever done so. But for Wicklow, like a good season getting that win over Cavan, but still at the same time, they would have been disappointed with that Wexford defeat.
They probably would have. I personally give them a C. I think the Division 3 campaign was absolutely brilliant, but they lost their 3 group games, but then miraculously won against Cavan. It was a superb performance for all involved. But I suppose the Wexford game was a bit disappointing, considering where Wexford came from in Division 4. But I just give Wexford a C, Wicklow rather. I'd give him a C probably. I suppose it was a bit of a shock to the system that Davy Burke left, considering I think Davy Burke's Wicklow's best manager since Mick O'Dwyer. Like, that's a huge compliment in all honesty, considering where Miko brought that Wicklow team. He brought them to the last 12 in Ireland, like Wicklow. Like, that was a superb achievement. And if Davy Burke stayed on, like, this would be an interesting question. Could he have brought Wicklow to that sort of stage of the championship, a bit like what Miko Dwyer did? I certainly think so. I think he's a superb manager. And considering the players coming through at Wicklow, Owen Darcy, Podge O'Toole, Oshie McGrainer, some very good players at Wicklow, some handy players. And, I suppose they are punching above their weight considering what's happened over the last few years. They've been constantly in Division 4, but I'd give them a C, a bit of a mix. Like, the championship was poor, but the league was superb. The way they stayed up, the way they beat Cavan as well.
Yeah, like, they beat Cavan quite comfortably, and that's why I've gone with a B personally, because I think, like, to beat, the Ulster champions the way that they did, like, Cavan, fair enough, Cavan were really poor and probably never really, turned up on the day, but I think you'd have to give full credit to Wicklow. Like, they got their game plan spot on in that game. I remember, like, they were floating a lot of long balls up to Shawnee Furlong, and it was causing all sorts of problems. So I think Wicklow definitely deserve a lot of praise for that. I suppose we'll move on to Clare, and we'll move on to the Munster Championship sides. I suppose for Clare in particular, I mean, again, another side that is probably punching above their weight in terms of, like, obviously they're a massive hurling county, and I mean, very impressive in the league. Like, to come, within one win of promotion to Division 1, like, that would have been one of the stories of the year, in my opinion. Like, there were only 4 points beaten by Mayo, and let's not forget Mayo went on to the All-Ireland final. They scored 218 against Mayo. Like, they were really, really impressive. They beat Kildare, they beat Laois, and I mean, hugely impressive from Clare, and the likes of Owen Cleary, Darren O'Neill, very good stuff from Clare.
Absolutely superb. And Clare have been progressing over the last few years, and a lot of people seem to downgrade them, but I've watched them closely as a Cork fan, obviously. Clare have beaten Cork 3 times out of the last 4 attempts. I suppose from a Cork side, it's embarrassing, but from a Clare side, it's absolutely superb, considering where they were a few years ago under, I think it was Paddy O'Shea was managing them, I think, in 2010, and that was a horrid season for Clare, and they were wondering where do they go from here. And Colm Collins came in 2014. He's done an absolutely superb job at Clare. I think, considering where Clare were, Division 4, and to bring them up to Division 2, and not only stay there, but to chance for Division 1, a county like Clare, they're largely a hurling populous county. That is a superb achievement, and fair dues to Colm Collins. He's one of the most underrated managers in Ireland, in my opinion. I personally give them a B. The only reason I didn't give them an A, because I thought they were a bit disappointing against Kerry. I thought maybe, yes, Colm Collins has done a phenomenal job at Clare, don't get me wrong, but I thought he played slightly the wrong side against Kerry. Like, Joe McGann wasn't starting, Daniel Walsh wasn't starting, and if they started and ran at that Kerry defence, who knows what would have happened. But I personally give them a B. I've only not given them an A because of that Kerry performance, but over the years, superb from Clare. And as you said, Owen Cleary, David Tuberty, a few of them players, superb. And considering Gary Brennan wasn't in that team. Like, Gary Brennan was considered a big loss to Clare at the start of the year, and they go and they should have beaten Mayo, in all honesty. Like, Mayo were at the All-Ireland final. Like, you can't ask for more for Clare in the league. Superb achievements, and I'd probably give them a B at the end of the year.
Yeah, like, I suppose you can understand the logic for people who would give Clare an A. Obviously, like, there's not much more they really could have done in the league. Like, if they were, it was probably the way the groups were made as well. That was probably a little bit unfortunate for Clare. Like, if they had finished first, had have got that win over Cork, they would have then played Meath. I reckon they would have beat Meath, in all honesty, and then gone up to Division 1. You can't not give them an A, but I would give them a B as well. Like what you said, I think against Kerry, for example, they didn't quite show that same level of performance that they showed throughout the league. And fair enough, Kerry are, a much higher quality opposition than, well, I suppose, Mayo went on to the final, Kerry were beaten in the semi-final, so maybe not. But I suppose for Clare, like, very good year, and I suppose it'll be interesting to see what happens next year. They do have a couple of players stepping away, retiring and whatnot, so it'd be interesting to keep an eye on them, and I do think it will actually be quite tough for them in Division 2 personally next year. But I would still give them the benefit of the doubt in avoiding relegation right now. Anyways, we'll move on to Cork, your own county. I suppose not really a great year at all for for Cork. I mean, they were nearly relegated to Division 3. They got absolutely hammered by Kerry. Fair enough, they beat Limerick in that Munster Championship game, but even at that, they still weren't really brilliant. Absolutely, obliterated by Kerry after what was actually a very impressive first quarter. And then, Ronan McCarthy steps down. So I suppose as a Cork man yourself, what are you giving your own county here?
Jeez, how long do I have, Aaron? It's been an absolutely horrendous season, and people in Mayo and Dublin think it's bad not winning the All-Irelands. We haven't been close in years. Like, it's actually depressing at this stage. I might seem harsh as a Cork fan. I don't know about yourself giving this. I've given them an F. I think it's been absolutely horrendous. And considering, like, when you consider, like, in 2012, we were the All-Ireland semi-final against Donegal. Coming out that day, who would have said we'd lose to Clare 3 times in 4 attempts and lose to Tip, I think 3 times in League and Championship over the last few years? You would have absolutely laughed. It's absolutely horrendous how it's unfolded, and considering that Kerry loss was the joint second biggest defeat in the Championship, only beaten by Leitrim's defeat to Mayo. Like, it says it all, really. It's absolutely horrendous. And you could say, yeah, Kerry are All-Ireland contenders, but like, their defence was there for the taking. Considering Tyrone beat them in the All-Ireland semi-final, they were there for the taking. And personally, I think Ronan made the right decision. They came to the right decision at the end, but like, I hope to God now we go outside the county. Like, Kevin O'Donovan, our CEO in the Cork GAA County Board, is being like, a lot of fans are saying to him, get someone from outside the county. I'd have to agree. Like, I can't see anybody in that in Cork managing this team other than Keith Ricken. But I suppose Keith Ricken has said previously he doesn't want the job. John Finton Daly, who's done a good job at not agree. Like, other than that, I don't see anybody in the county of Cork. People are saying Bobby O'Dwyer, but he's from a losing regime. He's from the managerial setup from this year's loss to Kerry. So what good is that going to do? Like these young players are not going to develop if they're not going to be listening to the manager. Like you look at Brian Hayes and Jack Callan. Like, there's argument they'll go to hurling. They'll definitely go to hurling, considering the way the hurlers have improved and considering the mess in football at the moment. Like I personally go for someone like Kevin McStay, Malky O'Rourke, Jim McGuinness. I know a lot of people would laugh at this, but we were All-Ireland champions in 2010. If Cork are to be serious about being All-Ireland contenders over the next few years, we have to go for the best. Simple as that. And considering Tyrone won the All-Ireland this year, Dublin, as we said previously, has a bit of friction at the camp. Kerry's defence is not great. Mayo can't win an All-Ireland. So this is a huge opportunity. And Cork are just messing it up as usual. And I think over the last few years, it's been an absolute mess. And considering the 4 All-Ireland semi-finalists, Tyrone in 2019, we were within 3 points of them in the Super 8s. Dublin, we were in the game until the last 10 minutes. Kerry, we beat last year. And Mayo, we should have beaten in 2017. So we're not far away. It's just the results against the smaller counties that are so frustrating. Like, against Kildare, the first game out this season, like, the commentator was saying we were playing a sweeper. I thought that was ridiculous, in all honesty. Like, Kildare struggled defensively. In the last game of 2020 against Meath, they conceded 5 goals. So what's the obvious thing? What's the obvious game plan? Attack them. That's how you win the game. And we persisted to play a sweeper. Like, I don't know what's going on in the Cork County Board. I think it needs to be. I suppose it's talked about when Cork go out of the championship, but it wasn't this year because it was all about Kerry's win. But I think it's been a real fall from grace. I'd give him an F. I think it's embarrassing, frankly.
Yeah, no, I've given them an F as well. And James LeBron says here McCarthy had to go, in my opinion. Probably should have left after the loss to Tip last year. And Liam Horgan says F for Cork. I agree. It baffles me what's happened to them in the last 10 years. And I'd agree with Liam there as well, actually. Like, it is really surprising to see what's happened with Cork. Like, I feel like for example, you had Joe Brolly coming out with an article there, like digging into Mayo and going mad at Mayo. Like, but what about counties like Cork and, like, for example, who have all right, fair enough, they don't have the same population as Dublin, but they are, a bigger county than Dublin in terms of size. So it is quite baffling that Cork aren't, like, they seem to be doing a lot right at underage level, like under 20, they seem to be always thereabouts. They won an under 20 All Ireland there, I think in 2019, wasn't it? And they seem to, be bringing through, they seem to have the players there, but it just seems to be at senior level that number one, they're not bringing those players through, in my opinion. Number two, like, for whatever reason, a lot of the quality players that they have, like don't seem to be performing as well as they can. Like, a lot of players are doing very well at club level, with Nemo Rangers and whatnot. And we're seeing even, in the college tournaments and whatnot as well. But for whatever reason with Cork, like, they just seem to, like, it seems to be always one step forward, one step back. Like, they'll produce a good performance here, but then a bad performance against, like what you said, a Clare or a Kildare, for example. And every time there's a bit of positivity, it's followed by a bit of negativity, like beat Kerry and then lost to Tipperary. So, I mean, the next management position would be interesting. Like, Jim McGuinness would probably be an interesting one, all right. Like, certainly to see Cork probably play his style would be very interesting, no doubt about it. And to be honest, I don't know if Jim McGuinness would ever take a job in Gaelic football at inter-county level again. In all honesty, maybe Donegal. I feel like that's the only county he'd probably go back to. Kevin McStay, maybe, like, you wouldn't rule that out either. That would certainly be an interesting one. And like what you said, obviously you had a few managers at underage level ruling themselves out of the senior management position. Like, I think that's a big sort of, worrying point as well. Like, and it is interesting because you have the Sports Direct deal and as well. You've Páirc Uí Chaoimh, like, you've got the resources that other counties don't have, but yet a lot of other counties are surpassing what Cork are doing.
That's exactly the point. Like, I consider over the last few years, since Coonahan left in 2014 onwards, we've only reached the last 8 of the All Ireland twice. Like that's a similar number to the likes of Fermanagh, Cavan, Kildare, Roscommon. Like I consider Roscommon. Like, in 2010, we met them in the quarterfinal, and we absolutely obliterated them. And you say 11 years later, Roscommon would be in a healthier position than Cork footballers, you would have said, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, it's absolutely diabolical what's happened over the last few years. And I don't think there's been a county that has fallen from grace so much since, well, I suppose Down is another example. We'll get to them in the minute, considering they were in the final with Cork in 2010. But, like, over the last few years, it's been rough. It's been really rough. And considering we lost to Tipperary for the first time since the 1940s, we've got a record Munster final defeat. The only one to beat that was 1919, Clare losing to Kerry. So that was a long time ago. We had the second biggest defeat in the championship this season, only behind Leitrim. Like, that's our level at the moment. Leitrim, Longford. Like, we were considered above those counties in the Coonahan era with Canty, Cassan, all them players. But now we're on their level. Like, this is Cork. Like, it's absolutely shambolic what's happened over the last few years. And it's quite frankly embarrassing to be a Cork fan over the last few years, in all honesty. It might seem a bit of a rant now, but honestly, over the last few years, as Cork football fan particularly, I'm sick of it, in all honesty. And the next managerial appointment has to be right. Like, Tomás O'Shea said the next managerial appointment has to be right in 2017 when Peadar Healy left. That was Ronan McCarthy. That clearly didn't work either. We, in fairness, probably regressed under McCarthy, considering 2019 we were competitive in the Super 8s, and we get a hammering off Kerry 2 years later. So where's the improvement? There's no improvement whatsoever. Despite what young underage success comes through, and despite the Sports Direct deal or Páirc Uí Chaoimh, unless you have the right men in place in the managerial system in Cork, nothing's going to change. We're still going to get hammerings off the likes of Kerry or Division 2 hammerings. And the way things are going, I might be far, but I think we're going down to Division 3 again. I think Offaly are much better than us now. Tomás O'Shea has gone there, so he definitely want to beat Cork. I suppose Dowd are probably the only team at our same level. Clare beaten us plenty times over the last few years. Derry are much better than us, improving. So I don't see how we'll stay up at Division 2 if things are currently in place at the moment. Like, the only way I could see us staying in Division 2, surviving in Division 2, is bringing someone like McStay, or someone like Malachy O'Rourke just to improve things in the county a small bit. But unless that happens, it's dark times for Cork football. No matter what young players are coming through, or no matter what financial systems come through. And as regards to population, Cork has a bigger population than the country of Iceland. It's a huge county. There's no excuse for it whatsoever. Like it's absolutely depressing to be a Cork fan at the moment, and I hope it improves next year. But for this year, it's been embarrassing, frankly.
Yeah, I suppose it is an interesting one. I suppose we'll have to wait and see, obviously, by the time next year comes around and we have a proper look at Division 2 and see maybe who might be promoted, relegated and whatnot. But I suppose for Cork, they do have a good, they still have Mark Cronin in there, who's a good underage player coming through. You've a couple of other players as well coming through. I can't quite remember them all now off the top of my head, but I know there's a good crop of players there. So there is the potential there for Cork to kick on. I just think, like what you said, they really do need to get that managerial appointment right. I suppose discussing one county that might cheer you up is Kerry. Ironically enough, they're next on the alphabetical order. Fair enough, they beat yourselves very, very comfortably, but they didn't win the All-Ireland when I think everyone very much expected it, especially after seeing what happened with Dublin. They obviously got beat by Mayo, and I think pretty much everyone had Kerry, and I suppose Tyrone went to beat them, and obviously Tyrone went on to win the All-Ireland. But I suppose from a Kerry point of view, you'd have to be, it's another year again where there's been so much hype, so much discussion, so much, about David Clifford and Sean O'Shea and Paddy Clifford and Killian Spillane and, all these top quality players. But once again, they weren't terrible against Tyrone. I do think they were impressive at different stages. They did show some good signs, and maybe on another day they might have come through and won that game. But I suppose once again, it's that defence that again has really cost them.
It's cost them for years. Since Mark O'Shea or Aidan O'Mahony have left, I think it's cost them dearly in years gone by. I might be a bit nice to Kerry this time. I'd probably give them a C. I think, look, they didn't win the All-Ireland, but considering it wasn't that bad afterwards, they lost to the eventual All-Ireland champions after extra time. Some Kerry fans would go on about it, it's a disaster. It wasn't that much of a disaster in all honesty. They finished top of their Division 1 group, which was impressive in my opinion. They were going to play a Division 1 final, and yeah, I think it was an okay season for Kerry, but obviously they didn't win the All-Ireland. But they have to improve a few things. Number one, defence is obvious. I think they need to improve defensively to win All-Ireland in the future. And number two, they can't rely on Sean O'Shea and David Clifford forever. I keep saying that. Clifford scored, 8 points against Tyrone. Sean O'Shea scored close to that. It's grand having brilliant players like that, but if you don't have other players to step up and take the game by the scruff of the neck, what's the point, really? And yeah, I suppose the way they've treated Peter Keane over the last few weeks, I think, honestly, it's disrespectful. I think they're saying managerial appointment open, but they haven't said Peter Keane has stepped down. So what is it? I don't know what I'd do if I was Peter Keane right now. I'd probably feel sick. It's absolutely ridiculous what's happening. Jack O'Connor's now there. So what's happening with Peter Keane? He's in the Kerry job, but still he has to reapply for next year. I think that's ridiculous, in all honesty. It's a disrespect to him. Considering over the last few years, I've looked over their results. The only, bad point really was losing to Cork. That Mark Keane goal. Other than that, they reached an All-Ireland final against Dublin. They took them to a replay. They probably should have beat them. In 2020 as well, they won the league. In 2021, they lost to the eventual All-Ireland champions in Tyrone. So I don't see how Peter Keane is to blame in all this. In all honesty, it hasn't been a disaster for Kerry, but I give them a C, slightly below a B or A, because they did win that elusive All-Ireland. But it's not a disaster by any means, in my opinion.
Yeah, I suppose I'm torn between a D and a C. I do have a D wrote down here, but now that you kind of speak about it, I'm kind of thinking maybe a C, I suppose, is a little bit better. And like what you said with Peter Keane, I might be wrong on this, but I think he was the manager who won a couple of All-Irelands as well at minor level, wasn't he, with Kerry, with the likes of Clifford and whatnot. So like that is some level of disrespect, the fact that they're, you know, saying like because it's not like they're not going to go through this process of interviewing a number of different managers if they weren't going to keep Peter Keane. Do you know what I mean? Like they're like the reason why they're, unless Peter Keane comes out with some, you know, huge game plan or comes out with something mad in his interview and all of a sudden they, you know, decide to keep him, or maybe a lot of their targets say no, like maybe Jack O'Connor, who knows, maybe he just wanted to take a breaker or something like that. You just never really quite know. But like what you said, you would have to feel that Jack O'Connor would surely come back into Kerry. And yeah, like I don't think things are terrible. Like they have the players there, they're getting closer, they're not a million miles away. Like you forget up until the Tyrone game, they'd beaten everyone very comfortably. You know, they hammered Tyrone in the league, let's not forget, hammered Galway. It just seems to be that defensive structure, and they do have a lot of good club players in there as well, so they're not a million miles away. But if Jack O'Connor would come in, it was to come back in, I don't know what you think, but I'd probably have Kerry as, you know, it's a weird one because you don't have them favourites all the time. I feel like they're always favourites and they never quite deliver. But with Jack O'Connor coming in, like what more would Kerry have to do to win an All-Ireland?
Absolutely, yeah. And I suppose he converted Ciara Donaghy into the great full forward he was. I suppose he could do the same with the likes of Tommy Walsh in that team. Like Jack O'Connor would come up with these plans and win the All-Ireland. Like considering he won the All-Ireland out of nowhere really in 2009. Like that tells you all you need to know about him as a manager. He's a superb coach, and he will probably win the All-Ireland with that group of players. But I still think, no matter how good a manager Jack O'Connor is, I still think it's disrespectful the way they've treated Peter Keane over the last few years, considering what he's done for that county. Like I'm not a fan of it in all honesty. And look, Kerry have probably been pressed over the last few years because the fact they didn't win All-Ireland since 2014. But let's not forget they've counteracted one of the best teams of all time in Dublin. So it's not that much of a sin that they haven't won the All-Ireland in the last few years. It's just Dublin have been absolutely phenomenal. That's no sin of Kerry's, in all honesty. So, look, they're not far off in All-Ireland. They just need someone in defence. They need that kind of defender. I think they lost it with Peter Crowley last year. I think he was one of the best defenders that Kerry had. Yes, Gavin White's a defender as well, but I think he's more of an attacker. There's still question marks about him defensively, the same as Tom O'Sullivan. So, look, they need a defensive structure in Kerry. They need that defensive rock. And unless they don't get that in the next few years, I still don't think there's enough there to win All-Ireland, despite if Jack O'Connor comes in or not.
Yeah, like, and I suppose you do have Jack Sherwood in there, who's a very good defender. I've watched him at club level a couple of times. So, like, there's plenty of players there. I'm sure it's just a matter of probably coaching or getting some defensive coaches in or something to that effect. Like, they definitely have the attacking players going forward. It just seems to be that structure, conditioning, or something to that effect. And like you said, with the whole Peter Keane situation, it is quite baffling because, like, he is definitely a manager, and like when you look through like what he's done, like they were within a kick of a ball from winning the All-Ireland in 2019. Like, they were within a kick of a ball, and that was Dublin at their, you know, prime best, their absolute best. They'd beaten Mayo, they completely wiped the floor with them in 2019. Fair enough, Dublin were down to 14 men, but Kerry were the reason why Dublin were down to 14 men, because Clifford absolutely tore Johnny Cooper inside and out. So, you know, I do think it is quite baffling. And when you do think this is all voluntary as well, like this isn't professional sports or anything like that, you know, so it definitely does leave a bad taste in a lot of mouths. And I'm sure even I see Adam who was commenting there, we've treated Peter Keane badly, to be honest. And yeah, you know, you would have to say even Kerry fans would agree that at the moment, like, there's definitely been a lot of bad kind of treatment labelled away of Peter Keane. Moving on to Limerick, we'll discuss them briefly, and I suppose the other three Munster counties very quickly. Like, you know, Tip and Wicklow very close to getting promotion for Limerick. Fair enough, they were beaten by Cork, but, you know, probably underperformed on that day, in all honesty, in the Munster Championship, considering they came up from Division 4 and they were into Division 3 and nearly got promoted. Like, they had to play Derry in that playoff game, and Derry, as we very well see, very, very good side, and we'll get on to them in a moment. But I suppose from a Limerick point of view, I've given them a B. Like, I think, you know, they've had a great year.
Yeah, exactly. I give them a B as well. Like, against Cork, they lacked a lethal finisher. Like, Danny Neville was close to that. He had a few goal chances, and if they go in, they could have beaten Cork, in all honesty. So, yeah, I'd give him a B as well. And you'd have Westmeath as favourites in Division 3 next year. I'd have Limerick. I think they're a very good side. Like, you look at the strength of some of them players, the strength and conditioning in Limerick in both hurling and football is phenomenal over the last few years. So, you look at players coming on, even Josh Ryan. Like, the guy looks like a second row for Munster Rugby. He absolutely looks superb condition. And this is a sub in the Limerick team. So, look, I'd give Limerick a B. Absolutely. They've done brilliant, and maybe the good times are returning to Limerick. Like, let's not forget they were quarter-finalists in 2011. They should have beaten Kerry and Cork in 2010. So, look, they are a proud footballing county in many ways as well. So, and Billy Lee, again, another underrated coach in Ireland, in my opinion, and definitely deserves a B. Limerick have been absolutely superb this year, and they'd be my favourites to go up to Division 2 from Division 3.
Yeah, I suppose they definitely are improving, and like what you said, there's a lot of very good sort of things happening behind the scenes with Limerick at the moment, and I do think that eventually at some point in the next 4 to 5 years we will see Limerick gradually progress, maybe get to the level of a Clare, or maybe even kick on from that. Like, I do remember 10-15 years ago Limerick were a very good team. Like, they were getting to, I remember they got to an All-Ireland quarter-final 1 or 2 years. Like, they were always they always had decent players, and there's a good population in Limerick. Fair enough, Limerick would be predominantly a hurling county, and you would have to say that for a lot of dual players, they would probably favour playing for the hurlers, given the success that they've had in recent seasons. But, there's a lot of very good coaches as well. Let's not forget Paul Kinnerk, who's a part of Limerick hurling's backroom team. Like, he is predominantly a football coach, and there has been talks before that at some point he could be the manager of the senior footballers, and that would be something that I think that would very much excite Limerick fans. But I do think for Limerick it is a matter of being patient, especially under Billy Lee. They've good players coming through, and Ian Corbett and all the rest, and it'll be interesting to see Limerick at underage level now over the next couple of years as well, whether they can kind of build a minor and under 20 and maybe do something there. That would definitely be something I'd be keeping an eye on, no doubt about it. Tipperary, I mean, disappointment for them this year, relegated down to Division 4, beaten in that game against Longford. Just a lot of very disappointing performances from a Tipperary point of view, and obviously beaten in the Munster Championship as well by Kerry. They actually showed some positive signs in that game, but I suppose I'm giving them an F in the end. Like, I think to go down to Division 4, I think, given the players that they have, I know Tipperary isn't predominantly a football county and all the rest, but given the likes of Conor Sweeney and some of the talent that they have there, like, I just do think they've very much underachieved this year.
They have underachieved, yeah, but I'd be closer to an F as well. I was originally going to give them a D. I was being a bit nice to them in many ways, but considering they lost Robbie Kiley, I thought that was a huge loss to them at the start of the year. Conor Reardon, who was instrumental in winning the Munster title for them, he moved on to Australia. So they've lost a fair few players, in all honesty. But still, I'd probably give them an F, considering they had Conor Sweeney, Michael Quinlivan, a few of them players. Like, it was a disappointing year in many ways for Tipperary, and considering they lost to Longford, that was a bit disappointing. But against Kerry, they actually put it up to them. I was surprised they put it up to them, but maybe that was because they were playing a defensive system. They didn't go out as much, and they lost by 11 points, which wasn't that bad, considering Clare and Cork got absolutely pummeled by Kerry at the end. So it wasn't that bad in many ways, but considering they went down to Division 4, I'd probably have to give them an F as well, and I'd fear for Tipperary in the next few years, because a lot of them players are now either switching to hurling or they're going down under to Australia, the likes of Conor Reardon. I'd be kind of worried for Tipperary in the next few years. Would they even go back up to Division 3, considering how Wexford and Sligo are improving with their young talent coming through? So, yeah, it's going to be tough in the next few years, I think, for Tipperary, but David Power is a decent manager. I wouldn't be surprised if they weather the storm a small bit next year, but for now, yeah, I think an F is a fair assumption.
Yeah, I suppose I'd agree with you on that as well. Like, a lot of people would look at Cavan and Tipperary as the two sides that should automatically bounce back from Division 4, but personally I don't actually agree with that. I think Cavan are definitely well placed to come back, but I think Tipperary, like, I think there might be a bit of transition there now over the next couple of years. It'd be interesting to see what happens with Michael Quinlivan as well. Like, obviously he was travelling originally in 2020 and then had to come back because of the lockdown, so it'd be interesting to see what happens with him, whether he's in the panel next year or whether he's going to go travelling again or opt out. I'm not quite so sure, but definitely a lot to figure out behind the scenes for Tipperary. We're going to move on to Waterford, and I suppose if anyone is watching this on YouTube, if they could leave a like and subscribe, it would kindly appreciate. I can see a number of comments and people tuned in there at the moment, and we will be running through the Ulster teams in a moment as well, and that will certainly be interesting given how competitive the Ulster Senior Football Championship was this year. But for Waterford, we'll discuss on them briefly. I mean, very hard one to discuss with Waterford because, you know, they got that huge win over Wexford. They're not, you know, obviously hurling is the top dog and, you know, in Waterford, there's no doubt about it. I've given them a C. I think that win over Wexford was a huge win, and, you know, the fact that they were within one win from getting to Division 3, fair enough, the structure of the league probably helped them to a certain degree, but the fact that they were so close to getting to Division 3, like, I think that is a huge achievement. And I do think, you know, given that they probably are one of the weakest counties in Ireland in terms of Gaelic football, I do think that is very impressive.
I think it's very impressive as well. Like, the C, not too bad, not too decent either. Like, it was in line with expectations. Like, Waterford, as you said, they're a small county and they can only afford to concentrate on one sport in particular detail, and they've chosen hurling. Fair play to them for that. They have a superb hurling team. But I suppose I was chatting to Bright Luby for a website I was doing over the summer, like a preview to the Limerick game, and he's hoping that Waterford get up to like Tip and Clare and Limerick's level over the next few years. That's their aim. That's their aim in Waterford. And considering Shane Ronan's their manager now, there's good signs for Waterford. Paul White is their coach. So, yeah, there's some decent players, decent individual. Conor Murray at centre forward, I think, is a very good player. Very good find for any Division 4 fanatics. He's a very good player. And, yeah, I suppose they have a good management team there. Shane Ronan managed the Tipperary ladies footballers over the last few years. He's now managing Waterford, and he's done a decent job. Wexford was a huge win for them. And considering what happened against Carlow the previous week, they were utterly annihilated. So to bounce back from that, the win over Wexford, that shows bottle, and fair play to Waterford for that. But you couldn't give them much more than the C, to be honest. Like, they're a small county, in all honesty, and they've concentrated on one sport, the hurling. But the footballers are moving along nicely, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joseph Flynn definitely wants us to discuss Sligo anyways, no doubt about it. And we will get to Sligo and all the Connacht teams a little bit later. But I suppose we'll move on to Ulster, and we'll discuss Antrim first of all. We will go in alphabetical order. Antrim, I mean, I've given them an A. Like, I think the fact they won all their league games, very, very impressive stuff. The fact that they have had a new management in there, new managers coming in, I mean, huge stuff from Antrim to get promoted to Division 1 or to Division 3. Like, personally, I didn't see it coming, really. I thought maybe there'd be a bit of transition. They'd have to lose a couple of games before they go and win a couple. Huge win and huge, you know, achievement to get up to Division 3 against Armagh. Fairly competitive as well, like, especially going into the second half. It was really just a couple of late goals that probably swung the game. So what are you going for here?
Yeah, I'm kind of tempted by giving them an A, considering your explanation of Antrim there, but I was originally going for a B, considering the population that Antrim have. I don't know, is that a bit harsh? But changing my mind, I know it was small, but I'd probably give them an A. Like, winning every game in Division 4, superb achievement, obviously. And against Armagh, was one of the top 10 defeats in the championship this season, but it was a few late goals, and they were competitive with a very good Armagh team for stages in that game. So good season for Antrim, yeah. And Aidan McGinley, no better man to manage that team. He knows how to win All Ireland, so he's a decent coach to have. And considering you look at Brian Dooher, what he's done with Tyrone, like, there's no better managers at the moment than former Tyrone players, it seems. So well done to Antrim, and I think they could stay up next season. They maybe could stay up. Like, you look at the teams at the bottom end of Division 3. You look at Antrim, Wicklow, Longford, Louth. I think there's a realistic aim for Antrim to stay up in Division 3, and that would be a superb achievement for them. But yeah, I'd probably give them an A as well, considering they've won every game in Division 4 and were close to Armagh in stages of that game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose for Antrim, like, there is definitely a lot of potential and whatnot. Like, Paddy McBride, I thought was very impressive this year. You've obviously got Paddy Cunningham in there as well. Like, you have a lot of very, very good footballers coming through the ranks with Antrim at the moment. So definitely a lot to be positive about. And I suppose for Enda McGinley, like what you said there, like the fact that Tyrone do seem to have a lot of very good managers around at the moment, like that will definitely give them a lot of confidence. And in Division 3 next year will be interesting. All right, I do think there's a base for Antrim to build off, and especially if Casement Park was to get built now in the next 5 or 6 years, like I think like Antrim could become, they're a sleeping giant in many ways, like maybe not so much in ball, but they're one of those counties that, if someone was to say to me in 10 years time Antrim were in an Ulster final or Antrim have won an Ulster title, I'd probably go, do you know what, that's a fair assumption, because they have that kind of resources there. And I know obviously with Antrim there's been a lot of political tensions down the years. I do think we're moving on from that, we're progressing past that now at this stage, and I do think we will start to see both the hurling and the football county start to come good now over the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a superb time for Antrim, considering the hurlers performed very well this season. And let's not forget, they were in the Ulster final as recently as Armagh. Like, people seem to forget that they were in the Ulster final in 2009. I think Paddy Cunningham might have been around at that point. So, yeah, no better man to gain experience from that campaign there. So, yeah, it's some very exciting times for Antrim. And as you said there, if Casement Park gets built in time, and I think they could stay up in Division 3. That'll be an aim for them next season. And maybe to pull off a surprise, if they get a lucky draw, maybe the likes of Down or Cavan or Fermanagh in the Ulster Championship. Who knows? Like, Antrim could win that game, and anything's possible with Enda McGinley in charge, it seems. And best of luck to Antrim. They kind of are a sleeping giant considering the population there.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I suppose the team that beat Antrim in the championship, that was Armagh. And I suppose for Armagh, like I actually tipped them to win the Ulster Championship originally. I felt like they were building something. They were looking really good in Division 1. Like certainly a lot of positives there, no doubt about it. Obviously, getting that win obviously at the start of the year over Monaghan, and beating Roscommon as well. So a lot of positives, like staying up in Division 1, not an easy thing to do. You normally see a lot of counties go from Division 2 to Division 1 and then go straight back down. Roscommon are obviously a perfect example of that, with Rian O'Neill, Oisin O'Neill in there as well. Like a lot of very, very talented footballers. Got beat by Monaghan in a game that was very close. Like they had it within their grasp. So I've gone for a B personally. I mean, it might be a little generous to some respects. I do think Armagh should still be doing a little bit better, but like Armagh are one of those counties. Like I don't think they're a million miles away from Tyrone, and like I think that's what's going to make the Ulster Championship and the All-Ireland Championship very, very interesting next year, because like there really isn't a lot between a lot of those kind of counties, and Armagh are definitely a county worth keeping an eye on. I suppose the question will be like, can they, under Geezer, can they make that step up? Like, can they go and win an Ulster Championship or get to a final? Like I feel like that needs to happen soon, because like there is that statistic of every county has gotten to an Ulster final since Armagh were last in an Ulster final, and I do think that's something that needs to be addressed now in the next couple of years, or probably next year realistically.
It absolutely has. I don't know, am I being a bit mean to Armagh here, but I'd give him a C. I don't know, is there expectation in Armagh with the players they have? Superb achievement for staying up in Division 1, but look at the players they have: Rian O'Neill, Jared O'Burns, Conor Turbot coming on off the bench, Oisin O'Neill. Like, they have a superb team there, and I don't know, is it kind of a realistic aim to stay up in Division 1? Could they push on further, maybe to reach the top of Division 1, or maybe to get to an Ulster final? That has to happen sooner rather than later. Like, that statistic, yes, Armagh are progressing and their players are absolutely superb, and they've reached the last 8 over the last few years, and they've challenged very well over the last few years, but that statistic is slightly embarrassing, considering like Antrim have got to an Ulster final, Fermanagh have, Down have. It's kind of frustrating to be an Armagh fan that way. And yeah, considering their rivals, Monaghan have done very well in Ulster over the last few years. Cavan have won an Ulster Championship and got to an All-Ireland semi-final. Like, Armagh need to get to that sooner rather than later. I think the foundation is there for Armagh. They have superb players all over the park. They have a superb coach, Kieran McGeady, who probably could have got Kildare to an All-Ireland final in 2010 if a certain decision went his way. So they do have the foundations there. But the question is, can they implement that next season? I think they can, realistically, if they keep on McGeady and they keep on some of their brilliant young players. But for now, I'd probably give them a C, because it's kind of in line with expectations. I'd know is that a bit mean, Aaron, but I think that's where Armagh should be, and they probably should be pushing on further.
Yeah, and I suppose they definitely do have the talent, there's no doubt about it. Like a lot of very good quality players, like all across the board, like we said there before. Like Conor Turbitt's another very good player coming through. You had Ross McQuillan, who came back from AFL, looked fairly decent actually in the games that he played this year as well. So there is a lot of talent there, and maybe with the fact that maybe when you don't have the whole COVID situation as well, maybe there'll be more time for Kieran McGeeney and for the likes of Kieran Donaghy in there as well. So like there is, there is potential there, and there is players there, no doubt about it, and they definitely can kick on. Like, and maybe with there being no COVID as well, maybe that will help them because they'll have more, time. The management will have more time with a lot of those players as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it'll be interesting with Kieran Donaghy. Would Jack O'Connor call him up? I don't know. Would that be kind of, it would be bad form for Kieran Donaghy, to leave Armagh at this point. But if Jack O'Connor comes calling at Kerry, I don't know, would Kieran Donaghy actually move down to Kerry to move closer to home? Like, it's a tough one, really. But yeah, the COVID situation, I suppose it was a tough situation for everybody before the game, for both sides, considering the loss of Brendan O'Duffy for Monaghan, and for Armagh, the COVID situation, the game shouldn't have really gone ahead. But considering both sides produced a brilliant spectacle, that's testament to both the teams' abilities and what they're capable of, really. So, yeah, I suppose Armagh, it's a decent season, but they need to push on next season. And without COVID, and with Kieran Donaghy settling into his new job, I think the sky's the limit for Armagh. They can perform well next season, but they definitely have to get that monkey off their back and get to an Ulster final, first of all.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I suppose Cavan, I mean, they're a county that's, very interesting, like, winning that Ulster Championship in 2020, going into 2021. I had them as clear favourites to get promoted from Division 3. I felt like Cavan were, I always felt like Tipperary winning the Ulster Championship was a bit of a fluke, and with all due respect, given the fact that they didn't have to beat Kerry, whereas Cavan, they beat Monaghan, they beat Donegal, they beat Down as well. Like, they beat good teams on route to that Ulster Championship, and even against the Dubs in the first half, they were fairly, competitive. You've Thomas Galligan in there, very bright player. You've experienced players like Martin Riley and Raymond Galligan in goal. You've Patrick Faulkner, who's come through. Like, a lot of very, very good quality players. But for them to go down to Division 4, another relegation under their management, I mean, just a lot of question marks there, and I've given them an F. Like, I think the fact that they got beaten by Wicklow as well, like, with all due respect to Wicklow, like, Cavan really should have been winning that game. And look, fair enough, they actually did show some positive signs against Tyrone, but I think that's kind of been the story for Cavan in 2021. Against Derry, they looked decent at different points as well, lost that game. So against higher quality opposition, they've showed some sort of quality, but ultimately, in the end, it's counted for nothing, because they did beat, they won one league game, I remember, against Longford, but other than that, fairly disappointing from a Cavan point of view.
Very disappointing, considering the players he listed there, some superb talent in that Cavan team, and considering they were regulars in the under-20 semi-finals around 13 and 14, like, the development line seems to be going well in Cavan, considering they won the Ulster last season, but for this season at least, certain F. I'm sorry, but look, I don't think it's a disaster for Cavan. Mickey Graham's a decent manager. They will come back next year. They'll get promoted for Division 4, let's be real. I think Tipperary aren't at the level of Cavan. I think most of the Tipperary players have moved away, whereas the Cavan players, most of their big players have stayed on, and they will improve next season, and they'll be a decent side for anybody in the Ulster Championship. Like, but the thing was, I was listening to, I think it was Martin McHugh in commentary on the way down the car during the Cavan Tyrone game, and he was saying it's what Cavan do every year once they win the Ulster Championship. They, relax a small bit. I don't know, would that be a fair assumption of Cavan over the last few years? But even if Martin McHugh says it, and considering he managed Cavan to their last Ulster title before last year, obviously, I don't know, is that entirely true? If it is, well, I suppose they'll move on to next year now. Maybe this year was a bit of a hangover, considering it was such a big achievement. But considering the other semi-finals in 2020, I thought Cavan were much more, they belong much more in there rather than Tipperary. I thought Tipperary, struggled badly against Mayo. Cavan, they performed well in the first half against Dublin, in all honesty. They just lacked the legs at the end of it, and they tired towards the end. So I think the future is bright for Cavan. I think they just had a bad year this year, and with Mickey Graham there, I think he's a brilliant manager in Ireland, one of the best managers in Ireland in my opinion. But it was a disappointing year. I think it was a bit of a hangover after the Ulster final last year, but they'll improve next year. They'll get promoted from Division 4. I'll be confident saying that. It's an if this season, but I think they will be back, no doubt, next year.
Yeah, they definitely have quality players there, no doubt about it. And although they do have a couple of aging players, they do still have a good crop of young players there as well. And I do think the qualifiers next year, in particular, like speaking about Ulster sides, I think it's very important that we have those qualifiers there next year, or whatever way they decide to structure the championship, because I do think a side like Cavan could go on a bit of a run through the qualifiers. They could build a bit of momentum, get a couple of victories and really push on from there. So not impossible for a county like Cavan, no doubt about it. I suppose for Derry, I mean, what a year for them. I mean, obviously won every game in the league, won every game very, very comfortably, producing a lot of very good players. Shane McGuigan really stepping it up this year with 4 points. You've got the likes of Emma Bradley in midfield. You've got Conor Glass, who obviously came back from AFL. He's looking very good defence, in the likes of Chrissy McCaig and Brendan Rodgers. Like Derry are one of those sides that, will be very interesting to watch next year, because you forget that Derry were beaten by a point against Donegal with that late, Paddy McBrearty point. If you go back and watch Donegal against Tyrone, like Donegal were ahead against Tyrone by 2 points up until that Michael Murphy penalty. He misses it, he gets sent off. Tyrone turned the game around. I do think Tyrone would have won that game anyways, but I don't think the gap between Tyrone and Donegal is that big. So again, these Ulster counties are going to be very, very exciting going into to 2022. And what have you gone for with Derry?
I think it's an absolute certainty, superb season, absolutely superb from Derry. And even I go back, I was interviewing Chris McCaig at the podcast earlier on the year, and he was saying a lot of these Derry players are now back. Rory Gallagher has had a year to prepare, and the people listening to my podcast were like, what the hell is he talking about? He's a bit biased in a way, but in fairness, he was right. Derry were onto something. They were onto something special, and they only lost one game this year to Donegal by a point, and that was a heartbreaking defeat. If they only just kicked the ball over the bar in the last few minutes rather than just passing it around, but I suppose that's something they have to learn from. You have to take learning course from that. But yeah, superb season, absolutely superb. And I'm hearing the news as well. Anton Tohol, Anthony's son, is back in Ireland. He's doing his course in some university, so he might be back in the reckoning for Derry football. You look at him, Conor Glass there, Shane McGuigan, Chrissy McCaig, Benny Heron, some superb players in Derry, and I'd be fearing Derry next season in Division 2, definitely. I think they could even challenge for promotion. I know this might be a bit premature, but they could definitely. You look at Galway, they've been inconsistent over the last few years. Roscommon are dealing with a new system under Poacher. Meath might not have the young players bedding through quite yet. So Derry, there's hope there. I think they could easily get to Division 1 next season. Judging by Rory Gallagher is an absolutely brilliant coach. They could have gotten even a better manager there. And if they get Anton Tohol in that team next year, even from the bench, just in the last few minutes, if they need some legs, like Derry will be a massive threat next year, certainly, and well done to all involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd have to give them a guaranteed A as well. And Sean Murphy says Derry and Meath are two teams looking very good for the future. And Emma Quinn says it'll be interesting to see what Armagh and Derry do next year. Absolutely. And I listened to Rory Gallagher actually on, I think it's second, I can't remember the name of the podcast, but it's BBC's podcast anyways. I listened to him on that, and it was a very, very fascinating and one of the most interesting podcasts I've listened to this year, in all honesty. And he was talking about, why would I play a defensive brand of football with Derry? Fair enough, I done it in the past because, I had to work with the players of what I got. But with Derry, he was saying, with the players that he has, he believes that this might be the best team he's ever had. And I found very interesting comments by himself to kind of say something like that, considering he's worked with Donegal in the past. So I think for Derry, they're such an interesting county, and if they can get things right as well going into next year, if they can build on it, if they can, with the fact, obviously, hopefully, next year won't be a COVID year, so there'll be qualifiers, a proper league campaign. They really, really could build. And like what you said, a promotion is definitely on the cards. There's no doubt about it. They could very well go up to Division 1, as Liam Horgan says here as well. And then in the Ulster Championship, I mean, obviously it'd be very hard to get through Ulster. I think, it's fair to say Ulster is the most difficult province at the moment, but you just never know, like an All-Ireland quarter-final or something to that effect. Like if they get, a nice run in the qualifiers, like it's not impossible. Like if you're to look through the counties that I couldn't see Derry beating, I don't think they'd beat Kerry in Munster. I don't think they'd beat Mayo, although, they nearly did actually a couple of years ago in Connacht. They could very well beat Galway. It's not impossible. You're looking at Leinster. I don't think they'd beat the Dubs, but all the other Leinster counties they could beat. So, like, getting to an All-Ireland quarter-final through the qualifiers, like, I don't think that's impossible either.
Absolutely, yeah. And considering you just listened to that podcast with Rory Gallagher, that's very interesting to hear, all right, considering he managed Donegal, let's not forget. And Donegal had the likes of Michael Murphy, Paddy McBrearty, and they still played a defensive system. So that is very fascinating indeed. And it shows how good players are in Derry at the moment. And considering they won the minor title, the delayed minor title this year against Kerry, and some very good players there, like Matthew Downey's a real find. And you look at Benny Heron, Shane McGuigan, Matthew Downey, Conor Glass, Anton Tohill, there's so many to name. Niall Loughlin's another one from centre forward. Like, the talent is oozing in Derry. It's absolutely incredible, the talent they have in that team. And to have a superb coach like Rory Gallagher as well, times look very good for Derry. And considering the qualifiers is in next year, yeah, I think they could go pretty far. They could even go to the Super 8s next season. And who knows, they could even get promoted to Division 1. Those two achievements would be absolutely superb for Derry and their development.
Absolutely. We'll move on to Down. I mean, an interesting one with Down. Like, they did stay in Division 2. They lost all their league games up until the Westmeath game. Obviously, they beat Westmeath and stayed in Division 2. Obviously, got a victory over Laois. So they won 2 out of their 4 league games, albeit maybe against less opposition. And Laois, who, with all due respect, like, we've given them an F already. And like Down, even though they got hammered against Donegal, like, I did see some quality in there. Like, Barry O'Hagan looks like a very good player when he gets going. He scored 8 points that day. Kayla Mooney got a goal in the second half. Like, he is a very impressive player. Obviously, having played AFL in the past as well. There is quality there, like Liam Kerr as well. But again, obviously, they've Paddy Tally's obviously stepped away. There'll be new management in there next year. There is potential there and Down. Like, there is good players. But like what you said with Cork, they seem to be one of these counties that has potential, has players, gets a big result here. Like, for example, last year, very close to getting to an Ulster final. Like, they had Cavan on the ropes. They should have beaten them. They couldn't see out the game. Cavan came back and won the game. So, like, it does seem like anytime Down seem to be making a step forward, they take a step back. And next year will be very interesting. And, like, to be honest with you, it depends on their management. It's going to be tough to see how they stay in Division 2 next year.
It's going to be very tough to see how they stay in Division 2. I think the only team that is actually worse than them at the moment is Cork. In all honesty, I think Offaly have improved vastly. I think Clare are decent side. So it's going to be very, very tough for Down, in all honesty. I don't know about being a bit harsh here. I'd give them an F, considering they performed very poor against Meath. They were criticised heavily after their performance that day, playing defensive tactics. Colm O'Rourke, especially on League Sunday that night. I suppose they beat Westmeath. Westmeath would have been disappointed to lose to Down, so that was kind of lucky there. And Laois were very poor this year, so I suppose it wasn't really that big a win. And just to see them get trashed by Donegal, like, it's sad to see, in all honesty, with Down. Like, they're in a tough Ulster Championship, but over the last few years, at least, they've been kind of competitive over the last few years. But they got to an Ulster final in 2017. They beat Monaghan. So they're not that far away over the last few years. But against Donegal, they weren't that great. Barry O'Hagan, as I said, Quaylan Moody, some brilliant players there. But, like, you wonder, Kilcoo are doing so well in the club championship. And you wonder how them players aren't integrated into this Down team and doing so well. That's a bit of a mystery, in all honesty. But I suppose it depends who they appoint next year. I don't know who it will be. I don't know, would it be Pete McGrath maybe? I don't know who they'll appoint, in all honesty. But Paddy Tally probably had to step down this season. But it'll be interesting who they get. But for this season, I'd probably give them an F. I'm kind of expecting more from Down, considering the underage challenge coming through. Obviously, the under-20s, that's something to be hopeful about. And the Kilcoo side in the club championship. So the talent is there and down. The question is whether they use that talent to their advantage or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose moving on to Fermanagh, very interesting year for Fermanagh, obviously. I mean, at the start of the year, I think a lot of people had them as a team maybe to go down. I mean, personally, I thought they'd get relegated, obviously, under Ricey McManaman. I felt like there was too many changes going on in terms of, a lot of players opting out, and it just felt like a bit of a transition. Like, they had a lot of young players coming through. I thought it was going to be very difficult in the group that they were in alongside Derry and Cavan, but fair play to them. Like, massive achievement. Like, one win away from promotion to Division 2, that would have been a significant achievement. And fair enough, they obviously got beat out the gate by Monaghan in that Ulster Championship game, but there were positives, and given the players that they're bringing through at the moment, like Conor Love and Darren McGurn, like, there is positives there. And Sean Quigley, like, top quality footballer, no doubt about it. Like, some of his performances in the league were absolutely brilliant. So what have you gone for here?
Yeah, it was a decent season for Mano. I was originally going to give them a D, but considering what you said there about the beating Cavan for being one win away from Division 2, considering what happened last year with the COVID problems in Fermanagh, that was a brilliant achievement for Royce McManaman. Maybe he should have stayed on just to develop the work he's done. I'd give him a C, in all honesty. I think it's in line with expectations. It's not above expectations whatsoever. They lost awfully, pretty disappointing at the end. I suppose, yeah, I'd give them a C. I'd stick to a C, considering, they only won one game this year. It was an impressive win, don't get me wrong, against Cavan, but they drew against Longford. They lost heavily to Derry. They lost awfully, and they lost heavily to Monaghan. So I suppose it's an okay season, but it's not a particularly good season either. So I'd give them a C personally.
Yeah, and we forgot poor Donegal. I think I let my alphabetic skills down there. We forgot to discuss Donegal before all the Donegal fans come in the comments down below. Yeah, I suppose Donegal, they're another interesting one as well. Like, some positives in Division 1, like, definitely gave a lot of good performances, bringing through, great players at the moment, like Caleb McGonigal, and still have Michael Murphy in there. But Donegal's an interesting one, because I often wonder, like, they had Tyrone's number for years there. Like, they were beating Tyrone more than anyone was beating Tyrone. Like, they beat them in the league this year as well. They beat them in the Championship and the league last year. They seem to have Tyrone's number. And, like, when you looked at the first quarter when they played each other in the Ulster Championship, you would have thought the same as well. Like, they'd, comfortably, they were ahead. They'd obviously, Michael Murphy had that penalty. They were creating all sorts of goal chances. Noel Morgan was making some big saves, to be fair to him. And then obviously Michael Murphy gets sent off for that kick out on Kieran McGeary. And the game really just changed from then, and Tyrone really took the initiative and won the game quite comfortably. But it is interesting with Donegal, because, when you look at the fact that Tyrone have won the All-Ireland, and the fact that Donegal have beaten Tyrone more than anyone over the past couple of years, Donegal must be, when they seen Tyrone win that All-Ireland, I'd say a lot of the Donegal players, that probably lit a fuel or fire under their belly a little bit, because they're like, how have they gone and won the All-Ireland when we've been the ones that have been beating them consistently? Like, it's an interesting point of view, I think.
It is very interesting, but it's probably been a story of Donegal, in all honesty, over the last few years. They were all-Ireland contenders at around 18, 19, and then they go into the Super 8s and they fail miserably. I suppose the Cavan game was a testament to that last year as well. I don't know what it is about Donegal, but once they get one game away or 2 games away from a semi-final, they fail. I don't know what it is. Is that a mentality thing with Donegal? It's clearly not the players, because I think Ryan McHugh, Michael Murphy, Paddy McBrearty, Quayla McGonigal, another one, some superb players, Owen Bon Gallagher as well. So it isn't a players issue. Declan Bonner, I think, is a astute coach as well, so I don't think it's him. I don't know, it's just a mentality issue with Donegal. Yes, they got close to Tyrone, but I'd probably give them a D, considering they reached the Ulster semi-final. They were decent, in fairness, against Dublin in the league as well. And yeah, I suppose they beat down, they hammered down, but against Derry, they probably should have lost that game in any other day. And they would keep kicking themselves absolutely after Tyrone winning the All-Ireland the way they did. But yeah, I'd probably give them a D. But it's an interesting topic, all right? Like, how Donegal actually fail at the last hurdle before the semi-finals. I don't know what you think about that yourself, Aaron, but it's kind of fascinating indeed.
Yeah, like, and I suppose it's one of them things, like when we were discussing earlier about Joe Brolly kind of coming out with that article, and a lot of people, dishing out heavy criticism to the Mayo footballers. Like, it's interesting how some counties seem to get a free pass, and I feel like Donegal are one of them counties for whatever reason, have gotten a bit of a free pass over the last couple of years. Like, fair enough, I know they've only won 2 All-Irelands in their history, and pre 2011 they weren't a side that was traditionally winning Ulster titles year in, year out, but I feel like they've such a good team. Like, they've such good players, in there, like Michael Murphy, and you think of Paddy McBrearty in there as well, and Declan Bonner obviously as the manager. Like, they'd won 2 Ulster titles back to back. They have a really good side, and the fact that they can't even seem to get into the final 4 of the All-Ireland series, and losing to Cavan last year, like, I do feel like they're a side that's really underachieving a bit. And I feel like, like what I was saying before, the fact that Tyrone have kicked on and got another level and gone all the way to win the All-Ireland, I feel like Donegal fans in particular must be very frustrated watching that, because they're a side that has the talent, that has the players there. You think of Pater Mogan as well, like, all sorts of quality in that Donegal side.
Absolutely, yeah. And you look at the young players coming through that Donegal system as well. Like, there's some superb players in that Donegal team. The fact they haven't got to another semi-final since 2014. That was the year they obviously knocked out Dublin in a shock result under Jim McGuinness. Like, they haven't reached an All-Ireland semi-final since Jim McGuinness was in charge. Like, that's a long time, considering the players Donegal have. I don't know. Again, is this a mentality issue with Donegal? I don't know. It's, as we said already, it's not the players. Like, they have some outstanding talent in that team, but I don't know. They just fail once they're one game away from the semi-final. I don't know. Is it the fact they just bottle it? I really don't know what goes on in the dressing room there, but Declan Bonner is staying on another year. I don't know what Donegal fans think about that. Was it time for it to go? I don't know, really. Like, they won 2 Ulster titles. They lost the Ulster final last year, and they lost in the semi-final this year. So in that way, they've actually regressed rather than progressed. I don't know what Donegal fans think about that. So would they have been better off with a new manager, new ideas to try and break that semi-final stranglehold? Maybe they should have, in all honesty. And yeah, people need to start looking at Donegal. Like, they were all other contenders in the eyes of many pundits going into the Super 8s in 2018 and 2019. I can remember, like, they were hammering Ulster sides, like, including Tyrone in the 2019 semi-final. But then when they reached the Super 8s, they just don't do it whatsoever. They only win 1 game max. So I don't know what's wrong with Donegal over the last few years. They definitely have the players, but the mentality, there's an issue there, and you just can't quite put your finger on what's the problem.
Yeah, James LeBron says I'd give 1 more year for Bonner at least reach a semi-final. Yeah, definitely, for Declan Bonner, I know there definitely was a lot of Donegal fans that were saying, maybe they need a change in management, or, maybe if Jim McGuinness was available, they'd go and bring him back in, and who knows whether there was discussions behind the scenes. I've given them a D in the end, like, I suppose, to wrap up on Donegal. What have you gone for?
I've gone for a D as well. Like, under expectations, just under that. They didn't do too well next year, but they'll be back next year. But again, the mentality issue was there. But I'll give them a D for league and championship this season.
Absolutely, yeah. And I suppose one of the most improved teams really in 2021, in my opinion, has been Monaghan. Like, when you think back to last year when Banty McEnany came in, they obviously had that very disappointing defeat against Cavan. They were ahead for the majority of the game. It obviously went to extra time, and Cavan came back and won the game. You're thinking this year, very poor start to the league, lost to Armagh. We were beginning to think that maybe Monaghan were starting to come to a bit of, the end of an era. A lot of players were maybe getting older. They didn't quite have the same talent coming through. But to be fair to them, they turned it around. They got that huge win against Galway, obviously in the relegation playoff. They fought back from the dead. Players like Conor McManus once again, scoring big points. Jack McCarron stepping up. Aaron Mulligan looks like a fantastic addition to the side as well. Darren Hughes as well, Kieran Hughes, like, these guys being there in the big moments when it matters, and getting past Armagh in a very tough game on a very tough day, let's not forget as well, for Monaghan GAA. So to get that victory, and then against Tyrone, like, again, we were talking about Donegal and that kind of, factor that Donegal were so close. Monaghan were so close, just a point in the difference. And who knows what would have happened if Monaghan had gone on and won that game. So personally, I've given Monaghan a B. I think, a lot of positive signs there, no doubt about it. You could argue an A, but I do still think, they're in a relegation playoff, obviously. And, the fact is they got to an Ulster final. They didn't quite win it. So I've gone for a B. What have you gone for?
Gone for a B as well, maybe a bit higher considering the population in Monaghan, considering that, and they only lost to the All-Ireland champions by a single point. They're punching above their weight in many ways. Like, you look at the young talent coming through there, it's not stopping. And fair play to Monaghan, they're sticking by their beliefs. They're doing absolutely brilliant work at underage level, and it's proving dividends as shown by this year or years gone by. Like in 2018, they reached the All-Ireland semi-final. So it has gone on a long time, and you look at, yes, Conor McManus and a few of them players, Rory Beggan, are getting older, but you look at the younger players coming through, as I said, Art Mulligan, Sean Jones is another good young player, Conor McCarthy, who scored a hat-trick against Donegal. People seem to forget that. That was one of the best performances of the year. You look at Jack McCarran, I thought, has really come into his own this year, superb talent. Ryan Wiley, I thought, was superb this season. Ryan McAdespy was unlucky maybe not to get an all-star wing back. He was usually a forward, but he's changed to wing back now. So Monaghan have had absolutely outstanding year, and considering the population of the county, they are punching above their weight big time. And I'd have to give them a B. Banty McEnany looks like he's here to stay. He's done an absolutely superb job so far, and I think they'll do well in Division 1 next season, considering the young players coming through, and Conor McManus, I think he'll be there for another couple of years to come. So, yeah, it's an absolutely brilliant achievement by Monaghan. I see a few comments coming in, R.I.P. Ogie, and I suppose to do it for him over the next few years as well. They definitely did it for him in the Armagh game, a superb performance. And, yeah, it was an emotional year for Monaghan overall, considering Banty McEnany lost one of his dear friends as well, I believe, before the Armagh game as well. So it was an emotional year for Monaghan, but a great year as well. And I'd have to give them a B. Superb, and they're punching above their weight, as I said.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose, play that day, first of all, like, given everything that was going on, there was a lot of talk maybe the game shouldn't have gone ahead, and it went ahead, and, just a very spirited performance. You're thinking of Aaron Mulligan as well, who would have been, close friends with Brendan as well. So the fact that they, came through that game and won that game, I think they deserve all sorts of credit, and definitely, you'd have to commend all the Monaghan lads for the spirit and passion that they showed that day, no doubt about it. I suppose last but not least in Ulster, and that is Tyrone. I suppose it is an A. Like, let's be perfectly honest. I mean, winning the All-Ireland, their first in 13 years, and given the fact that, I obviously made a video at the start of the year discussing how Tyrone could be dark horses. And then I seen them in the league, and I thought that it's too soon. Like, they're just not quite there yet. I didn't think they'd beat Donegal, in all honesty. I just didn't think they were at that level yet. Conor McKenna wasn't producing the same form as last year. We didn't really know much about Cathal McShane, whether he was coming back or whether he wasn't. So, like, obviously a serious injury. We didn't even know if he'd ever play again. Like, let's be perfectly honest. They had defensive issues as well after that Kerry game. But, I mean, we're talking about an improved team. What a turnaround from them. Like, and, you could argue an A+ or even above an A if there was a grade there as well, because, like, the fact that they've gone and won the All-Ireland and beaten Kerry, who were the favourites, and then beat Mayo, the side who, beat the Dubs. They beat Division 1 sides in Donegal and Monaghan as well. They beat the Ulster champions. Like, the stuff of legends, really, and dreams, and just unbelievable stuff from Tyrone.
Remarkable and unbelievable achievement. And Brian Dooher and Fergal Logan in their first year, well done to them. And yeah, like, I was chatting to Owen Mulligan on the podcast earlier on the year, and even he was saying Brian Dooher, former teammate of his, of course, was a born leader, and he would revel this Tyrone team. And maybe it was time for Mickey Hart to move on. I don't know, most people would have thought maybe he was treated disrespectfully, but maybe Tyrone people had a point. Maybe they needed ideas, new ideas, fresh ideas. And even Owen was saying on my podcast, the game of football has moved on, and Tyrone definitely proved it this year. The attacking football they play, not just defensively, they work like dogs, don't get me wrong, but attack-wise, the way the attack for the second goal, particularly in the All-Ireland final, Con Kilpatrick catching a high ball, from straight away from the Doyle Morgan kicked out. Within about 2-3 seconds, the ball's in the back of the net. Superb play from Tyrone, and a guaranteed A. Like, considering where they were in the league, got hammered by Kerry. But maybe that's a lesson to every other team. Don't take the league too seriously, especially for Division 1 sides, because Championship is kind of where it matters. It's where it's at. And Tyrone were gearing towards that. And as you said, the run, it was the hardest possible, in all honesty. They beat the Ulster champions, and then they beat 4 Division 1 sides to win the All-Ireland. Deserving All-Ireland champions. Superb. And the training facility they have up there, I've seen a few images of that and off the ball or whatever. It's absolutely superb what they have up there. And developing youngsters, their minor players look like seniors already. I know they lost the final to me, but they look in superb condition. And the future looks very bright for Tyrone, not just this year. So, yeah, superb. A guaranteed A. And well done to all involved in Tyrone. They definitely deserve it, and worthy All-Ireland champions for 2021.
Absolutely, yeah. Like, and I suppose for Tyrone, like, could you see Tyrone maybe now going into a bit of a, like, given the fact that their age profile is pretty good with the likes of Padraig Hampsey and whatnot, and some of the other players that are coming through, like, could you see Tyrone maybe kind of kicking on a bit more and maybe, you know, winning another All-Ireland maybe in the next couple of years?
I could definitely see it in the next couple of years. It'll probably be hard to do it back-to-back, considering that great team with the Kavanaghs, the Mulligans, the Dewars didn't do back-to-back. And they were considered one of the greatest teams of all time. If this team does back-to-back, like, that'll be a superb achievement. But there is the question, like, people say Tyrone aren't able to do back-to-back. Who's there to beat them? Because I don't think Kerry have a strong defence. Dublin apparently are in a bit of transition or in a bit of disarray at the moment. Mayo, like, they can't, like, poor Mayo people, they can't win All-Ireland. So, and then the chasing pack, in my opinion, are not good enough to win the All-Ireland. So it's definitely a possibility for Tyrone to win the All-Ireland in the next few years. Do I think they'll go on the same road as Dublin? I don't think so. I think it has to be a completely special team to eclipse what Dublin have done. But if they do, it'll be absolutely some feat. But the future looks very bright in Tyrone. I think they could win maybe 3 All-Irelands maybe in the next 5-6 years. Whether I think they'll do 5 or 6 in a row like Dublin did, I'm not so sure. We'll have to see over the next few years. But the future is bright considering the young players coming through. And you look at Colin McShane, Conor McKenna, that forward line is absolutely frightening. And a lot of the players that were noticed a few years ago are now becoming stars. The likes of Con Kilpatrick, Kieran McGeary, Paddy Hampsey, Niall Slutton. There's some superb players there in Tyrone. So, of course, they can win a few All-Irelands in the next few years. Whether they'll do back-to-back, I'm not so sure. It'll be a superb team to do that.
Yeah, like, and I suppose me and you both had the opinion that Colin McShane should go and win an All-Star. Like, obviously a bit of a controversial opinion, I suppose, in many ways, given the fact that he hasn't started any game. But I really do think that Colin McShane should win an All-Star. Like, I think at the end of the day, like 2-8 in the championship, every game he came off the bench, he made a difference. He made a difference coming off the bench against Donegal. He made a difference coming off the bench, you know, obviously in the semi-final and final as well. So I think a tremendous year for Tyrone, and a tremendous year, no doubt about it, for Colin McShane.
Yeah, superb. I've seen you put him on your team of the year. I had my team of the year out as well. Colin McShane was on that. Like, he scored 2-8 in the championship. 2 goals that mattered at crucial moments. Like, you can't ask for any more from the guy. Like, he's been absolutely superb. And people saying David Clifford deserves more. David Clifford performed in 1 game this year. So, like, I think Colin McShane definitely deserves one because he's performed in more games than the likes of Clifford this season. And he performed in the games that mattered most in Croke Park to get teams out of ruts. Like, they were losing that game to Kerry, and Kerry seemed to have a grip on that game, and he comes up with a goal in magical moments. And then the goal against Mayo, the president wanted to flick it beyond Robbie Henley, superb goal, and he absolutely deserves an All-Star in my opinion. It is controversial, but look, there's a first time for everything, and yeah, maybe it's a first time for a player to get an All-Star while being a sub most of the time. He definitely deserves it in my opinion.
Absolutely, yeah. My voice is going here at the moment, so do bear with me as we get through these last few counties. But Like it is mad as well to think that Tyrone are actually fourth favourites in the bookies going into next year's All Ireland. Like Dublin, Kerry, Mayo, all ranked ahead of Tyrone. Like that is baffling in many ways. And you could understand like some Tyrone supporters who say, we're disrespected and all the rest. Like because like when you're fourth favourites after being All Ireland champions, like that's mental.
It is. Oh, you heard that in the podcast with yourself, John, Sean, and Daniel recently. Like, I couldn't believe it, in all honesty. Like, you win the All Ireland and you're four favourites. When's the last time that happened? I actually can't remember. Even Cork in 2010 weren't even four favourites. I think we were second or something. But Tyrone to be four favourites, that's baffling, in all honesty. Like, Dublin have regressed, Kerry don't have a defence, and Mayo, like, people betting on Mayo to win the All Ireland, flipping hell. Like, I don't know what to think of that. Maybe the bookies are just trying to, maybe they're bankrupt or something. They're trying to get more money or something like that. There has to be something behind this logic, because how can a team win the All Ireland and then they're four favourites for the next season? Like, I've never heard of it in my life in any sport, in all honesty. Maybe I'm trying to think of sports. I'm thinking league football and me, but even they're in the top three at least, I'd say. So to put Tyrone fourth, like in any sport, that is absolutely baffling. I can't believe it. Surely the bank have to be struggling with money, and to have this sort of plan to try and get more money in for themselves. That has to be the only solution, surely, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, it is baffling, all right. Like, it certainly doesn't make sense. Dan was saying there is Kildare being talked about. We discussed Kildare a little bit earlier, and obviously once the stream is finished, you can go back and have a look to see us discuss Kildare. We'll move on to Connacht anyway and get through those counties. Galway, I suppose, an interesting year for Galway, no doubt about it. Obviously relegated from Division 1. Like, Galway are one of those sides again. They like what I was saying with Donegal. Like, they seem to be getting a bit of a free pass to a certain extent. Like a lot of people criticizing Mayo and whatnot. Like, Galway have some really good players. Like a lot of very good underage players coming through. Won the under-20 All Ireland there, obviously in 2020. You've got players like Tom O'Clahan coming through, Matthew Tierney. And obviously you've all sorts of quality. Like Robert Finnerty's come in, Damien Comer came back from injury. Paul Kelly, Shane Walsh came back from injury as well. Like, so Galway do have a lot of very, very good players, but it just seems to be that they can't seem to, win those games against Mayo. They can't seem to quite kick on. And look, maybe they will next year under Padraig Joyce. Obviously, the lockdown has affected them quite a lot as well. It definitely, interrupted that momentum they had pre-COVID. So I suppose from a Galway point of view, disappointing. And what have you gone for?
I've gone for D personally, slightly under expectations. Like, considering since COVID began, they've only beaten one team in 2 games, Roscommon. That's about it. And that's kind of shocking in many ways for Galway. And think about, we talked about Tyrone recently and Galway. Before COVID, in around February or March, before the whole COVID thing, lockdown began, Galway beat Tyrone 225 to 12 points. Hard to believe now, isn't it? Like, Galway were considered All Ireland favourites back then, including myself. I don't know why I back Galway, but you could kind of see why. Like, they seem to be getting in players at the right time. Paul Conroy seemed to be performing. Shane Walsh, Damien Comer, some superb performances, but it's kind of dried up now. And considering Tyrone have won the All Ireland, Galway fans must be kicking themselves, in all honesty, considering they trashed Tyrone before lockdown even began. So, yeah, I'd probably give him a D. But the first half performance against Mayo, what I will say, that was positive signs for Galway. Like, Shane Walsh, Damien Comer seemed to be ripping that Mayo defence apart. But the second half was very disappointing. I don't think they only scored 1 point, maybe even none from play in that second half against Mayo. That was shocking statistic indeed. So, look, I'd probably give him a D, slightly under expectations, but they should improve next year, because the first half against Mayo was promising signs, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd give them a D as well. Like, I think there is players there, and maybe when Shane Walsh is another year coming back from injury and whatnot, like maybe he's a player who can really kick on and certainly dominate, and certainly be a top class footballer. Like, there's no doubt about it. We've seen what he done in the first half, and like the first half against Mayo would give Galway a lot of positives. It would give them, a lot of confidence going into 2022, and maybe with the qualifiers as well. Like, realistically, they're always going to, they're probably going to get to a Connacht final, semi-final at least, so they're always going to have a bit more time in the qualifiers. So certainly Galway, no doubt about it, have the talent and have the players. And like what we were saying before, like, you know, with the under-20s and whatnot, like there is players there. They just need to start winning more games. And actually, maybe them in Division 2 might help, because maybe then they might have, you know, more winnable games and they might be able to build a bit of momentum. And like what you said against Tyrone, like that was a very interesting point that you made there, like going back to that Tyrone victory. Like you do forget they absolutely wiped the floor with Tyrone, and that's the last time they actually played Tyrone as far as I remember as well. So yeah, I mean, maybe next year it might help them in Division 2, a bit like what we've seen with Donegal and I suppose with Mayo when they've gone down to Division 2.
Absolutely, yeah. And I suppose Division 2 is a step down. Look at the teams in there. Like, even you look at this year, they got hammered by Kerry. That's going to do no good to confidence of the players like Tom O'Callaghan or Jack Lynn or any of those players who were playing that day. But they do have brilliant players coming through. Like Matthew Hurley is an outstanding player. Tom O'Callaghan is an outstanding player, even at 19, 20 years of age, absolutely superb. Jack Lynn, like they do have the talent, Galway, and even the senior players, Paul Conroy, Shane Walsh, Damien Comer, there is talent in that team, Johnny Healy as well. But it's about putting it together, and I suppose Division 2 them a small bit, and Connacht isn't that competitive as it used to be. Like Roscommon are a bit of transition as well. Mayo might be reeling after this year, so maybe even a Connacht is on the line for Galway next season. So it should be very interesting to see how they develop. They definitely have the players. It's a question about putting it together. But I think Pádraig Joyce is probably the right man to take charge of them. He's trying to implement an attacking philosophy, which the previous management team didn't do with Galway. And that was quite frustrating within the Galway fan base. So I think he is the right man to bring them through. But next year will be the proof of the pudding. If they can perform next year, he's the right man for the job. If they can't, I think he has to go next year. But next year will be very interesting for Galway fans.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, yeah, I'd give them a D as well. Moving on, discussing Leitrim briefly. Obviously, you know, lost every game in Division 4. They were coming down from Division 3. Obviously, very tough for them, you know, to be somewhat competitive with Mayo. Like, Mayo were always going to beat them quite comfortably. And I do think at the same time, like, obviously the structure of the championship and, you know, all the rest, like, we can definitely discuss that another day. But I've given them an F, and it might seem a bit harsh. You know, you might ask you the question, like, what more can Leitrim really do? Like, what more can they achieve for a county like that? But let's not forget, they were coming down from Division 3. A lot of talented players, like Ryan O'Rourke, very top-class player. For whatever reason, he couldn't get a kick of a ball this year. I don't know if that was an injury or whether there was something going on behind the scenes. I'm not quite so sure. Terry Hyland, you know, done a great job at Leitrim over the past couple of years. I suppose there was not a lot more really he could do. He's obviously stepped down now. But I suppose for Leitrim, what have you gone for?
I've maybe been too nice to Leitrim. I might give them a D, considering like most of their players they have to commute from Dublin. It's a very hard job being a Leitrim footballer, in all honesty. Like, I actually had Ryan O'Rourke on the podcast earlier this year, funnily enough, and yes, he's a brilliant player, and yes, you have to be positive about your own county, but he says there's a Connacht title in this Leitrim team. I don't know, was he joking or was he trying to be positive? But like, it's hard to see how Leitrim win a Connacht title, in all honesty. Like, they're a small county. They were punching above their weight, challenging the likes of Cork in Division 3. Like I think it kind of stopped there, in all honesty. Like, you have to wonder what players are coming through other than Ryan O'Rourke. Maybe Keith Byrne is a decent player there, but the beating they got against Mayo, it was sad to see, in all honesty. And Terry Hyland just left. What more could he do with this bunch of players? You know, like, I'd have to give him a D. Maybe I'm being a bit too generous to Leitrim, but look, it was a tough year for them. It was a really tough year for them, and maybe they'll improve once the Tailteann Cup comes in next season. Hopefully they'll improve, because there's some smashing players in that Leitrim side, and they deserve a lot better. But for now, I'd have to give him a D. Maybe being a bit too nice, but it was a very hard year to watch as a Leitrim fan.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Like, an interesting comments, I suppose, from Ryan O'Rourke, no doubt about it. And I suppose if you have that belief, you never quite know. Like, I think a lot of people would have probably laughed, when maybe Cavan players were saying we can go and win an Ulster title, or Tipperary players or whatever. So, when they won a Munster title. So you never quite know. Like, it's not inconceivable, it's not impossible, but it is extremely unlikely. But we will need to keep an eye on Leitrim over the next couple of years. We'll move on to Mayo, I suppose. Obviously, a county that a lot of people love talking about, a lot of people love discussing, and they're one of those counties that you love to hate or hate to love. In all honesty, they get to the All Ireland final. Such a hard one to judge. Like they, in many ways, I feel like they overachieved, because by getting to an All Ireland final, like beating Dublin and all the rest, like you had Cillian O'Connor injured as well. Let's not forget, probably their best player. So in some respect, it's been a brilliant season for Mayo, but it's just the fact that you look back over recent history and you see that they keep getting to All Ireland finals and they can't quite get over the line. But if you were to look at this year and this year alone, like, I've given them a B. Like, I do still think they've shown progression this year to a certain degree, given the fact that Cillian O'Connor was injured. But at the same time, like, I don't know, I just don't think that's enough anymore. And I think for a lot of Mayo fans, they must be scratching their heads thinking, like, when is this going to change?
Yeah, like, I've bumped into so many Mayo fans in college over the last few weeks. So for some reason, they actually come down to Limerick. But yeah, it's so tough for them. It's so tough for them. I've seen so many Mayo fans down through the years, and they're just reeling over every All Ireland final loss. Like, I give them a B as well. Like, you have to wonder, like, when are they going to win an All Ireland? Like, I released an article for a student paper recently about how Mayo didn't win All Ireland, and I actually compared them to Cork in 2010. Like, Cork were beaten so many times by Kerry, and how the hell they get back up and win the All Ireland. They did the next year. They had an opportunity of a lifetime. They came up against Down in the All Ireland final and they beat them. I don't know, is this a mentality issue with Mayo? Like, they can't win All Ireland. Maybe it's in the head, or I don't know what it is. Maybe they lost Cillian O'Connor. But then again, like, Tyrone could call upon the likes of Dereck Canavan or Cathal McShane or Lee Brennan to come up through the ranks. Like, it's a hard one. It's a really hard one to judge at Mayo how they'll win the All Ireland. But like, the way they beat Dublin, yes, it was a phenomenal victory, but it seemed like that was their All Ireland. And look, if you're going to win the All Ireland, you have to set your goals higher than that. And yes, the beating Dublin was an outstanding achievement, but it's no good beating Dublin unless you win it at the end. And Mayo have learned that the hard way over the last few weeks. I'd have to give them a B, but I feel so sorry for their fans, so sorry for their players as well, especially the likes of Lee Keegan, Cullen Boyle, Cillian O'Connor, Aidan O'Shea have put so much into Mayo GAA over the last few years. And I think the things that Joe Broddy's come out with over the last few weeks, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And you look at other counties, put some attention on them, the likes of Cork, Galway, Donegal, who haven't got to All Ireland finals in years, who've been disgraceful over the last few years, embarrassments. Mayo have treated their fans to All Ireland finals year after year, and their fans have been through so much. And you even see the Mayo fans, they enjoy being at All Ireland finals, enjoy being at the occasion. And I think the way Joe Brody conducted himself on the Independent during the week was absolutely disgraceful, in all honesty. But in this, I'd have to give him a B, because they did get over the white line in the end.
Yeah, like, and Liam Horgan says, I think a B is very unfair on Mayo. Made an All Ireland final and bet Galway and Dublin and got promoted. Like, I understand, that kind of point of view. I understand your logic in that, but I do think at the same time, like, you need to look at it and think, if Mayo won the All Ireland, you'd give them an A. So if they're losing in the final, you give them an A as well. I can't quite justify giving them an A. And, like, let's not forget, in the final, they were really poor as well. Like, in the second half, they just ran out of ideas. They didn't have, they just didn't have the options there. James Horn, I thought, made some poor decisions with players coming off the bench, like bringing Padraig O'Hara off. Didn't quite understand that. Darren McHale's a player who's done really well at club level for Knockmore, and he was scoring freely. Like, he's I think he's in the top 10 or top 6 in terms of top scorers in the championship. Fair enough, they were against Leitrim and Sligo, but why are you not bringing him off the bench like that? It just didn't make any sense. In my opinion, I think there's players there, like, in my opinion, that, like, they could have brought off the bench, that could have changed the game. James Carr, I thought was way too late, in my opinion, like when he came off the bench as well. Jordan Flynn, the same. So I think for Mayo, like they have players on the bench, they have options there. Conor O'Shea might have been another good option as well. And I understand maybe you don't want to make too many changes with your team. But I do think at the same time, like James Horne's in-game decisions, and I agree with what you said with Joe Brolly, like his article definitely completely out of line. He probably made a few good points about James Horne's in-game decisions, but his choice of wording was really bad. But what do you think? Do you think James Horne stays on from here, or do you think maybe it's time for a change?
I think he has to stay on. Like I think he brought them to all the finals in a row. Like there's no point in finishing your job if you haven't set out what you have to achieve and being so close on so many occasions. So I think he'll go 1, maybe 2 more years and we'll see then. But yeah, as you said, with the substitutes there, another Darren McCain was actually a very interesting point there. James Carr, they brought him in on the additional time, which I thought was just baffling, in all honesty, because I think James Carr was the kind of player to run at that Tyrone defence, and Mayo needed runners. I think some of that Mayo team were willing to run at that defence. Oisin Mullen, Pádraig O'Hara, Tommy Conroy were willing to run at the defence. Lee Keegan, they were the 4 players, in my opinion. You bring Pádraig O'Hara off and you don't bring on James Carr. I mean, they were absolutely baffling decisions, and maybe Mayo's play at times in the All-Ireland final, especially in the second half, was slow and lethargic. I don't know what most people thought about that, but I thought once you got Tommy Conrad on the ball, you knew what was coming. He'd run at that Tyrone defence. If you got, Aidan O'Shea on the ball, I don't think Aidan O'Shea is a brilliant player, but I don't think he's a fella to run at the defence in the last few minutes. He's a fella you put in the square and you loft the ball high into him. Like, I don't know why Mayo didn't use him that way. Like, he would have been handy just to punt the ball long and try and fist the ball home or something like that, not to run at the Tyrone defence. So the tactical decisions were a bit questionable. But having said that, I think James Horne, he'd want to stay on definitely, because he wants to win that All-Ireland title. And considering the way Dublin and Kerry have performed this season, I think it's a realistic aim to win the All-Ireland, but you have to question, when's this bad luck going to run out for Mayo? Like, it's a worldwide phenomenon now, the Mayo curse, but we'll have to see over the next few years. I'd be for James Horne staying on because he'd want to finish what he set out to do.
Yeah, like I think he's done almost everything right. It's just not get over the line, like in an All-Ireland final. Like everything else has been perfect. When you think back to when Mayo were beat by Kildare in 2018 and then obviously beaten by the Dubs in 2019, don't think any Mayo fans or any GAA fans in particular would have predicted that Mayo would get to the next 2 All-Ireland finals and beat Dublin just 2 years later. So I do think you have to put that into perspective. He did win a league title as well, and he's obviously got them back up to Division 1 now as well. And Jack Nolte says B+. I suppose, yeah, like we're not really doing plus or minus grades, but I suppose if there was one county you were to give it B+ to, I suppose Mayo would probably get it, with all due respect. I suppose we'll move on from Mayo anyways, and we'll discuss Roscommon, I suppose, lastly, before we finish up with Sligo. I suppose Roscommon, I mean, another county again that like just probably has players, has potential. They obviously got to the under-20 final this year, so there is players coming through. But again, like just very disappointing performances. Lost every game in 2021 and lost to Galway again quite comfortably. Had a defensive system. Let's be honest, it didn't work. A lot of players not really playing to their absolute best. Like Donny Smith's been looking pretty decent. Other than that, like not really good enough from a Roscommon point of view.
Not really, no. It's a disappointing season for Roscommon, but I suppose they're trying kind of adjusting to a new defensive system under Poacher. Like it's going to be hard to adjust to that system, and you have to question, is Anthony Cunningham going to leave now? It's kind of bleak at times for Roscommon this year. They haven't won any game this year. Like as soon as you pointed that out, like I was originally going to give them a D because they're adjusting to the system, but the players they have, considering they lost every game, including the Galway, where they were pretty average indeed in Connacht, and they got relegated to top all that off, I'd have to give them an F. I know that might seem harsh on Roscommon considering the population there, but They won a Connacht title 2 years ago. They can't be that far away. Look, I'd have to give them an F considering the players they have, and it's interesting to know, will Anthony Cunningham leave the job now? Like, I don't know what Roscommon fans think about that themselves, but I'd have to give them an F because they lost every game. They got relegated. They went out to Connacht without a whimper, and yeah, it's a pretty bang average season for Roscommon in all honesty.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to go with an F as well. Like, there is potential there. Like we were saying, there are under 20 players coming through, and obviously you've Stephen Poacher in there. Like, very good coach, no doubt about it. I've listened to him in a couple of podcasts. He definitely knows the stuff. There's no doubt about it. So I think for Roscommon, there is still potential. It's not the end of the world. Like, it might be the end of an era for a lot of the players that they currently have. Like Conor Cox, probably, you know, he's more suited to being way further up the pitch. You were seeing him doing some defensive work at different stages against Galway, gave away a couple of frees, I remember. So there is potential there still for Roscommon. I suppose last but not least, in Sligo, I suppose, obviously a few people were asking about Sligo. We've left them till very last, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, like, an interesting one with Sligo, like, obviously got beaten out of the gate by Mayo, and fair enough. But in Division 4, like, they did show some promise. Like, you know, they obviously won their opening game against Leitrim, did show some promise against Antrim, nearly came through that game. They've got good young lads coming through. Like, everyone knows who Red Oak Murphy is. Peter Naughton, you know, was one of the top scorers in the Mayo Club Senior Football Championship, and his dad's actually from Sligo, which is why he's gone on and playing for Sligo. So, like, Sligo are moving in the right direction. They do have, you know, they obviously won the Connacht Minor title there, their first in 53 years. So there is potential there and positive signs for Sligo. And going into Division 4 next year, they'll certainly be a county worth keeping an eye on.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's some very good young players in that minor team. Like, they didn't lie down against Meath either. Like, that Meath team, considering what they did against Tyrone in the final, that was a superb achievement for Sligo to get that close to that Meath team. And a few of those players, Dylan McLaughlin at centre back looks very good. Luke Marin. So surely he's related to Adrian. Surely, thank God, he's related to Adrian. He has his genes, first of all, and he has his second name. So there could be another Marin like the championship for Sligo in the coming years. But yeah, there's Liam Gahan as well, Red Oak Murphy, superb talent, Peter Naughton. There's some superb talent in Sligo, and there's reasons to be optimistic as a Sligo fan. I actually think they could even get promoted to Division 3 next season. I think Cavan are a bit above them, but when you look at the other teams, Tip, Wexford, I think they'd be around that range. So I think Sligo will look at that going up to Division 3 next season and see as a realistic opportunity there. And Tony McEntee's an astute coach as well. So things are on the up for Sligo despite losing the Mayo that heavily. But you have to start at the bottom. You can't start at the top, as we all know. So yeah, signs are good for Sligo. I've personally, yes, they have, their signs are good, minor title, but this is a senior rate ranking in all honesty. So I'd probably give them a D, considering they've only won one game this year. As far as I know, I think they beat only Leitrim this year. We see how bad Leitrim are, unfortunately. So I'd give Sligo a D, but positive signs are coming in the next few years. There's signs to be optimistic as a Sligo fan.
Yeah, absolutely. I give them a D as well. Like, and yeah, there definitely is some positives there. I suppose after last year, there weren't too many positives. There definitely are positives this time around, certainly with some of the young players coming through at the moment. And definitely for Tony McEntee's men, like, it'd be interesting to keep an eye on them. And I think for counties like Sligo and Leitrim and Wexford, Waterford, they all need games. Like, they need games. And hopefully next year it is an 8-team tournament in the national leagues. There is a Tailteann Cup as well, and they do something, because these counties do need games. And for a county like Sligo in particular, especially for young players that are coming through, like, it's no help when you put them up against Mayo, you know, in the opening round of the Connacht Championship. Like, I think for Sligo, they should have been playing Leitrim and then the winner play Mayo. At least then you're giving counties more games. So, like, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And even I'd go back to Cora Staunton on the Sunday game. I think she was with Pat Spillane and Sean Kavanagh covered the Mayo Leitrim game, and she was suggesting the ladies football format, having junior, intermediate, senior. I think that would be an absolutely brilliant initiative to have, considering what Meath have done at the ladies football. And look, it would mean the teams would play at their own level. They get their day out in Croke Park, their day out in the sun, and it'd be absolutely brilliant for all teams involved. And not only that, they'll improve year on year. You look at Meath in the ladies football, they came out of nowhere in the intermediate championship. to suddenly then beating Armagh, Cork and Dublin, 3 favourites in the Ladies Football Championship, is absolutely unbelievable. So I'd be for having that kind of system in the Ladies Football. I suppose the Tailteann Cup it's an okay system, but I would rather have teams in junior, because even in the Tailteann Cup, you'd still have, like, I predict maybe Cork to go down to the Tailteann Cup next year, and if they don't reach the Munster final, they could come up against a Leitrim or Sligo and hammer them then because of the players they have. So what good is that going to do counties' confidence? So I'd be for having a junior, intermediate, senior. I suppose, what do you think of that, Aaron? Would you be for that? Like, I'd be for it, definitely.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. Like, I think, like, you have a structure there that works in ladies football. You've seen a county that's gone down to intermediate level, and they've obviously, got to a couple of intermediate finals and won the intermediate championship, come up and won the All-Ireland championship. Like, and some people would say, oh, well, that would never happen at men's level. But, like, with all due respect, like, you're looking at the ladies football, senior football championship. Dublin were very dominant there. They were winning 4 in a row. Like, Cork are a very good team. They've All-Ireland winners in their team, the most successful county at ladies senior football level. Armagh probably have the best footballer in the country in terms of Amy Mackin. So, like, for me to actually go and do that and win the championship was nothing short of remarkable. And who's to say maybe a Longford or a Cork go down to the Tailteann Cup or the intermediate championship, win it and come up and win an All-Ireland. I know that sounds ridiculous, but you never quite know. Sometimes you just have that momentum, and as they say, winning breeds confidence. And you're seeing even with Derry, for example, like, I think one of the main reasons why they gave Donegal such a good game was because they were coming in on the back of having a lot of confidence. They were looking very, very good, and they had a lot of confidence going into that game. So I think doing something like that, like a senior championship, an intermediate championship, a junior championship, I think it would work wonders in the GAA. I think it does really, really well at club level, and I don't see why they couldn't do anything different. I suppose the main kind of thing and the main question, and certainly a lot of players' concerns, would obviously be, are you going to be left in the dark? Like, if you're in the junior championship, is your game going to be on TV? Is there going to be people speaking about the game? Like, are counties still going to get discussed? Because, like, with all due respect, you do see in hurling, for example, the real lower levels in hurling don't get discussed enough. Like, very hard to watch any Joe McDonagh Cup games other than the final. So, like, hopefully that is something they address, and hopefully that is something they fix. I don't know whether they have to make more TV deals or something like that, but that would be the only real concern.
Yeah, absolutely would. But considering what they did with GAA Go this year, which they had €25 for the whole year, like, they could do something like that easily next year. Like, have the Joe McDonagh Cup or Laurie Marr or whatever on GAA Go, and you have to pay a $5 for those games, or €25 for the whole year. That'd be an amazing deal for the people of Ireland next year. And you're right saying that, like, Buff Egan has come out and said that in hurling. Like, it's nothing short of a disgrace that sides like Kerry or Westmeath or Longford and hurling aren't given the attention they deserve. And I think the GAA Go deal would be brilliant for the GAA. We were talking about Amazon Prime at the start of the year. Maybe they could show a few Joe McDonagh Cup games at least that aren't shown on Sky or RTE. That'll give those counties a lot of more exposure and a lot more attention than they definitely deserve. I think GAA Go could definitely pull off something remarkable next year by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll definitely be something they should look at, and something they should do anyway, hopefully in the near future over the next couple of years. Well, look, listen, Matthew, I appreciate your time anyway. We've been going for nearly 2.5 hours. I think this is a record in terms of the longest podcast I've ever done. And as people can probably tell, my voice is completely gone. So it definitely sounds a lot different now to how it did 2 hours ago. So I think it probably is the right time to finish up.
It is, Aaron. Get well soon anyway.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. Hopefully I'm okay anyways. And fingers crossed I don't have anything else to worry about.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. And get well soon, man. You deserve the 2K followers anyway at YouTube.
No bother. Thanks very much, Matthew. Thank you.